Hello there. Welcome to Wuchina Twin Time. I am Ian Wuchina. This is my twin. Let me speak, brother. My twin brother, Wuchina.
Yeah, Ivan Wuchina here, here with legendary Hollywood director Jack Perez.
Yes, legend, powerhouse. I mean,
Yeah.
just
Yeah, these are good adjectives. It's good for my ego. Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Well, we got our little setup for you.
Honored, yeah.
We got
Oh, look at that. That's awesome.
This is from I think one of the
This is Blast Vegas.
This is from a Xena action
It's
figure.
actually bring it show that it's something from when we were little kids. Actually, it was the Xena.
Oh, cool.
It opens up.
It was let me find the name of it. I found it on eBay to figure out
Wow.
what the thing is. Yeah.
We've had this since
you wrote an episode of Xena, and then you did the Hercules episode that had Xena in it. So that was really cool.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let me see what.
And
that was sort of considered the pilot, because they kind of did what they call a backdoor pilot, where they were introducing her in Hercules, and then they used that to basically spin off, the show.
Nice.
I remember that episode. It was a good one.
Yeah, it's called the Ambrosia Cave. It opens up, and you can like hide stuff inside of it. Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Got a little bow figure here going too. Some sword play.
I appreciate the shrine. Yeah.
Movies. And that's like the mini poster of Wild Things 2 that came with the DVD, so that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Oh, neat. Cool.
Let's see.
Yeah, glad to have you, man. Definitely honored. Very honored.
Man.
Oh, no, not at all. No, the pleasure's mine.
He met you through Ernst Harth, who's a really cool dude. Every viewers check out our Ernst Harth interview, and
I have. Yeah, it's terrific. Yeah, and sort of like the definitive Ernst Harth interview, right? It's like comprehensive. Yeah.
It was like almost 4 hours. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, massive. It's like, it's like 1900 or something. It's like a massive,
So much stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
So Jack Perez. Is it? How do you pronounce your name? Perez?
Yeah, it's Perez. Although I mean, technically, I guess it's the Americanized. Perez is how it's actually. I have a weird family, because my father's side of the family is all from Cuba, so that's where the Perez comes from, and my mother's side are all like Holocaust surviving Eastern European Jews. So I've got this weird sort of mix, but it's Perez is fine. Yeah, Perez is fine.
Yeah, because our last name is Wuchina. It's Croatian.
Yeah.
Right.
Butchered by Ellis Island.
Yeah.
So
It
definitely.
was like Lucina or something. Originally.
We always like to ask,
Yeah.
No, it's a good question, actually, because it's definitely like I'm a what am I? I guess I'm technically a second generation American, and my since both parts of the family are immigrants. I think they had this attitude. I don't know if it's changed, but they had this attitude then that the more American their children could be, the better opportunities perhaps they would have, which is kind of strange and sad, because you're basically trying to deny where you come from in order to sort of succeed in this new land that's supposed to be accepting of everybody, which has gotten worse and worse anyway. But I think that's why it's like the you're talking about Ellis Island butchering. It's like, Vito Corleone. Where are you from? Corleone. Okay, Vito Corleone is your name. So anyway.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. We're second generation on our dad's side, so from
Croatia,
Yugoslavia at the time. But that's cool, little connection there. So back to like so you're a kid.
What was your early life like? Like, how'd you get into movies and all that?
Yeah, like what's some of the first movies you remember going to see in the theater?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, like the first movie I remember going to see in a theater, my grandfather took me to see 2001 when on its initial release. So I was like, I think I was, when did 2001 come out? 1968
or 9?
Yeah, so I was like, he like basically brought a 2-year-old to see 2001, which I don't have much of a memory of, but I think it probably, it's like, what's the expression in Apocalypse Now? Put the zap on me. It was like a very intense, for a 2-year-old. I don't know, obviously most adults don't know what they're watching when they watch 2001. So that's the first sort of movie. But I was actually thinking back on like, there was a I grew up in the 70s, so it was a time where, and maybe everybody, I don't know if you guys are like this, but when you're younger, you seem to be less discriminating about like what you'll go to see. Mm-hmm. And so when I was like 10 or 11 riding my bikes, I would go see everything. And it didn't matter what genre it was. So it didn't matter if it was the Bad News Bears or Who is Killing the Great Chefs of Europe or The Spy Who Loved Me, you know what I mean? Which like The Spy Who Loved Me was, I think, my first Bond on a big screen.
When to start out with.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, no, I mean, it was great because as a 10-year-old, I guess I was 11 when I saw Star Wars, and during this the first Star Wars, upon its initial release, and I saw that at the Grauman's Chinese Theater.
Oh wow!
So
And that was a massive, sort of experience.
So you grew up, like in the LA area?
Well, it was weird. We were all originally from New York, but there was a brief window in the early 70s, I think from 74 to 78 or something, where we lived in Los Angeles. My father was transferred out to Los Angeles. And that was really my first taste of the movie business, because oddly, even though my family had no connections to showbiz, they grew up in New York with one of their friends married into the Dennis Weaver family. I don't know if you remember who Dennis Weaver. Dennis Weaver is an act. He's the crazy, crazy motel clerk in Touch of Evil. He was McCloud, which was a very popular cop show in the 70s, where he was like I think he was an Arizona cowboy who came to New York, so he was like a cowboy cop in New York.
Yeah,
sort of based on I think loosely on the Clint Eastwood movie Coogan's Bluff.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, Dennis Weaver was sort of like a big TV star in those days. And so I got kind of introduced to sort of behind the scenes of television and filmmaking through him and Universal Studios. And anyway, long story short, I ended up spending the summer of 1978 on the back lot at Universal watching them shoot and cut Airport 79, the Concorde, which was the last and arguably the worst of the airport movies. But it was like a real, it was right at the time where I was really getting interested in making movies, and using the family Super 8 camera like a lot of 70s kids did to make their own shorts. And suddenly I was seeing how real movies were being made, and I just became obsessed. Like, I mean, it's a standard story. I mean, it's like, even if you've seen the J.J. Abrams movie Super 8, which is not a great movie, but it deals with that very specific period of 1970s kids who love movies, who grab the home movie camera and start doing their own thing. And I was definitely part of that culture, and the special effects that were, the movies like Star Wars that were so groundbreaking in their effects work were it's like a kind of a perfect sort of transition when you're a kid playing with toys, and then you realize that all this is miniatures, and you start to like, I don't think I was obsessed necessarily with directing initially, but I think it was just the process of making this stuff that attracted me. So that was sort of like the beginning of the whole thing.
Yeah, at such a young age.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
You growing up in the 70s, you had some of the best influences like Spielberg.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
you name it, Kubrick. I mean, that had to have been like a great. We always go back to the 70s as like a really experimental time in cinema, because
it was the first time the R rating was really taking over, and people were just taking chances. They didn't have to follow that. Everything had to be PG from like the 50s to like the mid to late 60s.
Right.
Like, yeah.
And then
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, it was also, it was like the beginning of it was definitely a different attitude. I mean, a lot of us of my, and I'm glad to hear you guys too, because obviously you guys are younger, but a lot of us kind of look back on the 70s as the last sort of golden age, because it was certainly more personal and more and less, I don't want to say it's less entertainment driven, but definitely way more chances in terms of the types of protagonists you had, and the anti-hero and the downbeat ending, and filmmakers, everybody from Sam Peckinpah to Robert Altman to the ones that you mentioned, everybody you ever heard of, were doing things that you could only do in this sort of period following the sort of breakdown of the studios, and nobody knew it. It definitely came out of the late 60s. I mean, obviously Easy Rider is like as a touchstone, so like those movies, those were the movies that made the biggest influence on me as soon as I became old enough to sort of appreciate filmmaking and directing in general. And those were the filmmakers that excited me, and that's the kind of filmmaker I wanted to be. The problem was that by the time I got through film school myself and started making movies, my first movie was made in 1990, 91. It was, even though independent cinema had sort of was booming, even that now is shifting more back towards a 1950s.
Reaganomics really screwed up movies, I think.
It did. It changed. It changed it. You know, everybody knows that story. It's like, well, if Jaws makes $1 billion and an intimate, you know, character-driven movie with a downbeat ending makes this much money, then the powers that be go, let's keep making the thing that. And so that all you now we're at a point where every week a new Spider-Man movie comes out. Every other week is a new Star Wars movie. It's just like it's a flat line of I mean, it's just not interesting. It's not as certainly not as interesting to me as it was back then, you know. So I always say to myself, boy, I wish I had been born, you know, 15 years earlier or something, because then maybe I would have been. So the movies I like to make are harder to make. I don't know, they're not necessarily harder to make today because I don't even try to make those movies within the studio system anymore. But it's I don't know, I guess people are just attracted to a much less rich or complicated or character. I don't know what it is, but people just seem to want sort of candy coated crap, you know. It's interesting. Yeah.
Love about your movies is that you dip into like so many genres and
they're very genre bending. Like we watched your behind the scenes for Wild Things 2, and you're just talking about how it's like part chain, part drama, part swamp thriller. It's like
if that's a thing, swamp thriller. I think that came. Yeah, right. It's a mix. Yeah. But listen, I don't pretend to be. I mean, the thing is that I do work, like you said, I do work in a lot of different like popular genres, and a lot of the times those are the movies that I can get made. And so then it becomes a matter of like how much of the stuff that I really like, say from those 70s movies, can I work into that if possible, you know. And only the movies that are truly independent are the ones that I'm able to, like, you know, control more of that. So for something like Wild Things 2, you know, you're sort of locked into this thing that the studio say wants to make, and you got to deliver on that. And then it's just a question of how much of yourself as a filmmaker, if any, can you kind of get in there. And I don't know if that's detectable or not. You know, I don't know if it's as detectable in like a studio commission genre movie as it is, you know, in an independent movie where you have complete control over, you know, the content, you know.
Even in your more, like, you know, mainstream, less independent work, you can definitely see your style peeking through, like in Wild Things 2 and like Monster Island and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
We saw a lot of the big empty in Wild Things 2, actually, especially the ending score. There's like some horns and things like that. And at the very end of the movie, we noticed there's like
there's like
the nature sounds.
At the end of it was in the end of Wild Things 2, and at the end of what we watched last night.
What did we watch last night?
It was the second one we watched. We watched 2 of them.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you guys like doing your research. I mean, that means a lot, you know, that you watched all this stuff.
We watched most of your movies, but we just we watched all of them again.
And then the one, like, we hadn't seen The Big Empty, we hadn't seen the Deadly Stone video yet, so we watched those the last couple of nights, and that was
wow. Yeah.
Notice how La Cucaracha and Wild Things 2 both end in nature sounds right at the end credits, like, and we like that.
Nature ambience, like
bugs,
the crickets, and that one it's like it's like the swamp, like the last thing. It's like a stinger almost. The last thing you see in the credits.
America's Deadliest Home Video, 1991. Like I said, we grew up like really respecting Danny Bonaduce.
Oh, we grew up on Partridge Family and Brady Bunch reruns.
And then when we were kids,
we were born in 1990.
He became like a TV personality around the time we were kids.
Right.
Sometime middle school and high school, he was all over TV on reality TV.
He and Mario Lopez had a rip off of The View that was on for a couple years. So I mean, it was great. And like, we're just big fans of his. We know he has an interesting public persona.
You know, he's Danny Partridge. You gotta respect him for that.
Yeah. So at that point in his career, he was probably looking for some experimentation with his acting. And
how did the movie come about, and how did he get involved? Because like we were saying, it's you know, it's like a found footage movie or a home video movie. Like, if you would have had an unknown actor, people would probably thought it was real, you know? Like,
well, I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, it's funny because TerrorVision is I'm glad you started with America's Deadliest, because TerrorVision is actually putting out a Blu-ray, a new kind of collector's Blu-ray this summer with a ton. We just finished a ton of like special features, and there's like 4 documentaries and stuff. And it's good because the reason it's flattering because, you know, the way they're looking at it historically is that, you know, it's 1991, so it predates you know, Blair Witch and Man Bites Dog and Paranormal and everything else that came to be known as found footage. So at the time it was a novel idea, you know, it wasn't the very first time anybody tried to do that. Obviously, there were other films like Cannibal Holocaust that, you know, and 84 Charlie Mopic and things like that. But as far as like a crime or slash horror film, shooting something entirely through the lens and structuring it that way so that every cut, you know, every shot was as if it was a unedited video diary was new at the time. But you're absolutely right, because my whole concept was that if you found the tape on the street with no label on it and popped it in, that you would be watching it as if you had just discovered some raw 90 minutes of raw material. So you're absolutely right. By virtue of the fact that you suddenly have Danny Partridge in the movie. On the other hand, I guess by the time there was no attempt and there was no marketing in those days to say, hey, this is an actual tape. So it was always going to be a movie. But you're right. Yeah, with somebody else in the movie, a no name, I think it would have been added that extra level of authenticity. But he was like Danny was basically the result of us. It was purely a producing sales thing, in the sense that this movie was made totally independently. You know, the guy who plays Clint Dreyer, Mick Weinhoff. Yes. I met him. We met through mutual friends in LA. He was an actor trying to get work, and he was like finally frustrated and did like the ultimate sort of independent power move, which is like, fuck it, I'm just going to put this on my credit cards. Can you write a movie that we can sell to video stores? If you can direct it. I can't pay you, but write a great part for me, and we'll go make this fucking thing in Wisconsin, where I live. And my dad was like sheriff of the town, and we can blow shit up, and he can be our weapons supervisor. And it was kind of like, here's an opportunity to make a movie for like $10,000, but in a place that was friendly, like to the filmmakers. And it was like my first opportunity. It was like, that's what I moved to LA to do, is to become a professional director. I was having trouble getting hired to do anything. So it was kind of like, okay, look, fuck it, we'll just go to Wisconsin and make this movie. But the reason why the movie, just to digress for a second, the reason why it is what it is in terms of being like one of the first found footage movies is because the budget didn't allow us to shoot on film. So that was like what we started with, is like, you can make a movie for $10,000, but we have to shoot it on 30 frames per second, high 8 camcorder video.
We were actually, we wondered kind of like what film you did.
Yeah,
we didn't know if it was like early DV or what, you know?
Yeah, essentially there was a format that, like, you know, because early camcorder stuff was like literally a VHS cassette in a camcorder, right? And then they started to move into a smaller formats. One was 8mm video, and then there was high 8, which was sort of like a slightly higher resolution, but still standard definition, 30 frames per second video. And no matter how you sliced it, for me, coming from film school, having already working in 16mm, I was like, this looks like shit. I can't tell a story visually the same way that I would tell a normal movie, because it's just going to look like a soap opera, you know, which was the only thing in those days that was shot on video, but filmed classically, like, you know, like a movie. So I was wrestling with, well, how do I use this format that's a disadvantage, and how do I hopefully turn it into something that can be motivated? So the whole idea of a camcorder enthusiast filming his life accidentally, filming these criminals who kidnap him, all came out of this sort of. So in many ways, it's sort of that classic necessity is the mother of invention, right? Because the whole idea was born out of this limitation that was sort of presented, or an opportunity, which it was. But circling back, Mick was like, well, if we're going to sell this thing to video stores, even though it's an exploitation movie, which was one of the requisites, you know, it had to have violence, it had to have gore, it had to have sex. But it also had to have somebody maybe that was like a quasi-celebrity in the lead, if possible, even though we had no money. And so it was, again, one of these things we're looking around, well, who's going to do this movie for like no money? And it wasn't so much, I think, that Danny was looking for an artful or experimental sort of new avenue. It was more like he was out of work. He was going through legal problems. He needed a job, any kind of job. And so it was one of those circumstances where his sort of desperation and our desperation sort of met, and he agreed to do the movie. And he turned out to be great. He was a great guy, a totally cool guy. But he wasn't like what I wasn't even thinking, like to your point, I wasn't even thinking, oh, let's put a movie star or not, or television star in this thing. But it was just practical, like, oh, it'll help us sell the movie if somebody of note is in it. So that's how it's kind of started.
Well, you know, in the early '90s, everybody in that era had seen the Partridge Family. Like, man, I want to see Denny Partridge get. I love movies. Regular person just gets pulled into this dark underworld. Mm-hmm. It's definitely one of those movies, and just seeing Denny Partridge get pulled into this crazy, murderous chain of people.
His acting was great because he came off as this everyman, and like the notion of, you know, your wife.
The notion of him just leaving his life behind.
You catch your wife cheating. You drive down the.
I also love movies like that where somebody just takes off and leaves their life behind. That was really cool.
Right.
Yeah, and then gotta talk about the quarry shot. We watched that like 50 times.
We need to keep rewinding.
And we were like, is there a cut there in that scene at all?
You see the car fall
when the car turns into an accordion.
Good question. Yeah, it's cool. I'll have to send you the making of, because we talk all about that shot, because the quarry shot where the car is dumped in the quarry. And again, this was one of these scenes where, like, when I wrote the script, the introduction to the gang was not a quarry or a ditching of a getaway car. It was simply the Doug character on the road, having left his wife, and he was in a motel room sort of recording himself doing his diary, and he kept hearing all this banging in the other room, and he made the mistake of like smashing on the saying shut up, and it was the gang, and they kind of busted in and grabbed him and said, what are you doing, what's this camera? And it kind of went from there. When I finally got to Wisconsin and Danny had been cast, there was actually some like buzz locally, like, because people were like, oh, Danny Partridge is making a movie in Wisconsin. That's like a big deal. It was like the Beatles had suddenly come. So a lot of people started calling up saying, hey, can we be part of the movie? And for some reason, this quarry owner said, hey, you know, we got this quarry. Can you use it? And I was kind of like, well, it's a great location. I don't know how a quarry fits into the story, but it's a great, like, production value wise, it looks great. And so again, it was one of those things where it wasn't even, that was the seed of the idea. It's like, well, you can have a quarry. All right, well, now what can I do? So I just wrote a whole bit where Danny sort of is there because he says his dad took him to see them, you know, worked in a quarry and took him to see him blast. And so that's why he's in a quarry. And then the next step was Mick had a car that was like on its last legs, you know, that wasn't even, you couldn't even put it in gear, basically. He said, what if we just throw the car off the thing? So the whole scene is sort of coming from this opportunity again. To your point, though, since every scene in this movie has to be told in a single take, because that's the, you know, that's the design of the thing, 99.9% of everything that we did was with, you know, was all inside of one take. But this quarry shot where the car could only go over once, there is a cut. So the cut, and good eye, by the way, the cut is essentially the moment where Danny comes from in front of the camera to behind the camera, and he does like a crash zoom in on what he hears, which lands on the car. So essentially it's the old, you know, I've done this a million times in Hercules and all that stuff. It's basically burying a cut in the blur of the movement. So what I do is I did that whole shot of him talking. He hears the noise. He gets behind the camera. He pans over. He crash zooms in. We cut there so that we could control really the car gag. And then we started the car gag wide and just crash zoomed on the car again. So in the mush of the crash zoom is the cut. And that's allowed us to at least sort of not worry about Danny's performance and getting the car dump in the same shot. And in order to get the car dump, really, the cameras had to be like right at the edge of the cliff in order to see down. So where the camera was positioned with him was in the wrong place anyway. So in the cut, we were then able to reset, you know, our camera at the edge of the cliff. And it, you know, with the right sound, with the sound effect carrying over the cut, you generally don't, hopefully don't notice that. But it's still one take, you know. It was like, okay,
it was seamless.
Like, had to have been one take.
We swore it was one take. Like,
well, that's the point. I'm glad you, but you're right, because as filmmakers, you're like, yeah, wait a minute, that's not practical. There must be a cut somewhere in there. So you're right. You're absolutely right.
The car looked like a pancake. That car really
turned into an accordion.
It looked like it was like almost totally flat when it hit the ground.
Yeah, it crushed. I mean, I think we had to empty it most. I think, you know, from because I mean the fire department. I mean, it was all like it was arranged. It was like, okay, well, it can't explode. So I think most of the gasoline had to be emptied from the car. It had just enough to give it momentum over the cliff. But again, I'd never seen a car go off a cliff. I didn't know what it was going to do. It totally just like you said, like pancake, like aluminum foil. So that was cool. It made a great sound. You know, I didn't use any sound effects. It's just that's what it sounded like. But you know, it's funny because in this new Blu-ray, we were talking about how kind of, you know, when you're young, as you know, you tend to be kind of like more daring and sometimes stupid in doing stunts and things like that. And I was thinking about how, you know, Mick actually had to, you know, he put like something on the, I think he put a brick on the gas pedal.
Gear blocks, and he kicked it off. Or
he put it in gear. Yeah, and then he had it on a jack. You know, the whole thing was on a jack, so the rear wheel was spinning, and then he kicked it off, right? And it's like, yeah, I mean, it should do what you want it to do. But then I was thinking in retrospect, like, well, what if his foot had gotten, like, a shoelace had gotten caught on the bumper or something? Anything could have happened, you know? So, and even us, I mean, and this was one of the only instances, because it was all shot with a single camera. There's no reason to do two cameras in this movie. But for that, I was afraid that if the battery died or something happened, I needed to get that car. So we used two cameras just as a backup, one as a backup to get the car crashing. So me and my DP were basically like, we just roped in because we were like off the edge of the cliff, and we had like Mick's father, who was this ex-cop, like holding the ropes. You know, and that's like that's just like, you know, dangerous, you know. But it's sort of where you're at in the beginning. You're less, I don't know, maybe you find that when you get behind a camera, which can be dangerous sometimes, you're like, somehow you feel like you're protected, like nothing can happen to you.
Yeah. A lot of that just goes along with being younger too, I think.
I remember Ern said, you know, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing these kind of things normally, but when you put a camera in front of me, yeah.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, it's like suddenly it's like you're in this other, or at least your mind goes, oh, I'm in this alternate artificial reality. But the truth is that the laws of physics and all these things do apply, and you really have to be, you know, conscious of safety and things like that, which we were, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like we had a team. We didn't have like, you know, special, you know, practical effects, mechanical effects guys or anything supervising this. We just did it, you know.
But yeah, we really want to get back to the idea of America's Deadliest Home Video.
It's a play on America's Funniest Home Videos. We noticed. We thought that was cool.
And this is the early 90s when having your own video and your own camera is accessible, way more accessible. And this movie's playing on that, because that's a new thing. In the 80s, you were just getting into the VHSs, and then it was film, and you had to worry about sound back in the day. And that's, I mean,
not even everybody in America had video cameras in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, you know? And because they were really expensive, and even the tapes and stuff. I remember it was like with my dad.
Well, the camera we had, it was VHS, but it was like the mini VHS thing that you put in the
the VHS-C. You would slip it in, into the adapter, right? Yeah, I remember that.
Nowadays, people are filming their wives cheating with drones, and this is like the first.
Yeah, that's true.
Ivan and I were thinking about how revolutionary it was in film to see a guy filming his wife having sex.
The early days of a guy catching his wife on video cheating, right?
Yeah. And it's accessible.
That was a cool way to start the movie off.
So what do you think? Like that was another reason why it was so popular, because it was like it just played on that whole like the newness of having that at your fingertips.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was sort of going for. I mean, you're right. It was this interesting time where suddenly like home video, like going to the video store and renting, and that had all started to, you know, peak, started to cross with the slightly more affordable camcorder sort of revolution that was happening. And so, yeah, I mean, it for people who were really into it in those days, obviously this is pre, you know, everybody is recording their life now, which is, you know, interesting that it went in that direction. In those days, because camcorders weren't in everybody's hands, it was people who were really, I don't want to say they were, you know, they were just kind of like, yeah, I'll film my life, or I'll do a diary. I mean, people were making diaries, people were filming, you know, I mean, it was an extension of home movies, really, you know, but there was a certain freedom that came from now moving into a format that was cheap. I mean, you didn't have to develop it. It had sound. And so there was, I think, a freedom to document more, you know, more regularly. Whereas when you're shooting on Super 8 film or 8mm film, you're very conscious of, oh, well, I only really have 3 minutes, and then I got to take it to the store to get it developed. I'm not going to see it for a week, and I can't hear anything. So you're much more when people were filming their birthday parties or their weddings, it wasn't like they were just letting it roll. But once camcorders came in, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I can kind of just film, and let it ride. And so, I think, the idea of somebody just obsessively taping came out of that, the time. And also my own experience, like when I was in film school, we had, like you were saying with your stuff, we had very specific sort of set assignments, filmed assignments that had to be of a certain nature. But on the weekends, we would just grab a camcorder and just, get drunk or get high and run around and film stuff. Fun. And there was something about, again, like the freedom of just like, okay, we can just shoot anything and cut anything. That was actually really exciting. And so I brought that sort of like my own personal obsession of just with taping stuff into that sort of character. So it just made sense to me. I mean, I guess it's kind of the class. I mean, I think Stephen King, there's a great book, whether you're a fan of Stephen King or not, he wrote a book on writing called On Writing by Stephen King, which I thought I always found a very helpful, short, sort of autobiographical, like, this is how I do it. And one of the things that he said, I always remember, is like, what he starts with is like, well, this happened to me today, actually. And then I just throw in the what if. So it's the idea of like, well, if I'm filming myself having, and then all of a sudden I hear people screaming and I accidentally train my camera on something bad, well, that's the what if. All of a sudden, this mundane existence has taken this, extreme, violent, criminal direction just because but it starts with not some crazy high concept, out of the ordinary idea. It starts with the mundane, which is just, I mean, yes, he films his wife cheating on himself, and that is certainly titillating, but everything else is just like, here I am in a cornfield, here I am talking about my dad. And that's like that comes much more easily as a writer, because you can just take that from your own life, so I think there's something to that. But yeah, certainly the camcorder boom was, it was like exactly starting at that moment,
And it was like his birthday at the beginning, I think, and like
it's anniversary, I think. Yeah,
anniversary. So it really just starts off as like a situation in the early 90s where somebody would be just filming, but just
taping their thing, like, yeah, exactly. And I kind of took license in the fact that he's a guy who, like if he's just a normal or run-of-the-mill person who has a camcorder, he's not going to film everything. And so you don't have much of a movie, right? So he has to be somebody who is compulsive. So his nature from the very beginning, you're absolutely right, it starts with the most innocuous, like, here we are, it's our anniversary, blah, blah, blah. But then the following scenes are, it's our anniversary, let me tape us having sex, or let me film you, I'm going to film you while you're asleep, or, I'm going to, do a mock, like you're a bartender, like he just can't stop filming, right? And that's like so the character has to be somebody who has trouble turning the damn thing off. And I think if you look at social media now, it's like there are people, when I look at people who really like, the people film like every second of the day, for some of these people with these channels, they just never stop, so I think it's become more, oddly, it's become more the norm than it was maybe back then, because the technology is there now for you.
I think it really speaks to the movie's staying power as a cult classic because of that.
And it kind of was predicting, how things would be in the future. People are just filming everything.
And
that's cool. Thanks. Yeah. I think, there's been I think there's always been a need for people to document their lives, right? Going all the way back to still in family albums. I don't know if you're old enough. I don't know if in the family there were family albums, which nobody has anymore. But that's idea of like, it's almost like, think about it, like if somebody goes on vacation to Paris, the idea of saying, well, we're not going to get a picture of ourselves in front of the Eiffel Tower is almost unthinkable. It's like, we have to, because it's the proof that it somehow proves that this happened. And so it's a weird sort of baked in thing where if you don't photograph it, it's not legitimate somehow. And I think that's an old sort of, as soon as photography kind of came in, it was kind of like, yeah, let's seal this, or let's capture this somehow. And maybe this is all just deep rooted psychological fear of just, not existing, dying and not existing.
Yeah.
So perhaps, I don't know, but now it's like, it's just in a new language. It's like people, I often think about that, like, where's all this data going? I mean, well, it's all in the cloud. It's like, well, how can there be an infinite amount of space for how much shit people are, documenting? It's unbelievable, the volume.
It's insane. And
so I think
from an acting standpoint, we were talking about how difficult it might have even been because we think the way you did long takes,
there were
it was
so
really
many
similar
long
to
takes. Was there a lot of improvisation in the scenes?
And it's very similar to stage acting, we noticed, because long takes.
Yeah.
And that's
a lot of dialogue.
A lot of
not really a lot of room to mess up. Yeah.
A lot of really
right. Absolutely.
And we've worked a lot of Hollywood actors that hate having to memorize like whole pages. They force them to break it up. And this was just like we said, like stage acting, and these actors were just so believable and spot on.
What was her
character? They were great.
Oh yeah.
What was the gun wielding woman's character?
Vesna.
Vesna, Marina Williams.
She was scary. We want to know how you came across her, and she grabbed on.
Well, yeah, she was great. They were all great. I mean, the demands on them as movie actors were definitely much more. It was much more like you said, like it's doing a play. Like, like movie acting is so much easier. I mean, it's none of it's easy, but I mean, certainly if you only have to memorize certain bits, and you can break up these moments into various angles and dedicate your performance to, I'm going to do this bit, now I'm going to do this bit, as opposed to the whole thing working. And we did rehearse, you had to rehearse those for the camera, choreography, and certainly for performance. But yeah, they were all game to do it. Most of them had like their start in theater anyway, so they kind of took to it like, well, this is just how we've been trained anyway, so we're gonna do it that way. It was that way with Melina. Funny enough, Melina, who plays Vesna, we were boyfriend and girlfriend in those days. I mean, we were together in those days. We had met while at NYU, and had moved out to LA together in 1990. So, and she was an actor already. So it was just logical for me to be like, well, it's just one less actor. I mean, I know she's great. I'll write a part for her. And it's one less actor I have to find or pay for, so it was kind of like, so I wrote that part for her. But her personality is very much the opposite. I mean, she's like, she's certainly not a shotgun wielding maniac.
Was she comfortable playing such like a dark character?
Yeah, I think she was. I mean, it's funny because in this new Blu-ray of the movie coming out, she talks a lot about like how she was just able to sort of access. It was like basically her character, but uncensored. In other words, it was just, it was easy. Yes, basically, it was easy for her to do it. But I did, but she hadn't handled weapons until that movie, and we all went through kind of a weapons training period. And this was a time where there definitely wasn't CGI muzzle flash for any of the gunfire. So all the guns were real guns with full load blanks, which gave you that fire coming out of the gun. And so everybody had to go through like a weapons sort of safety training thing. And I had, she has the biggest weapon, she has to like pump that thing and fire it. And it's so it was more physically demanding for her to kind of like wield that thing, but she got very comfortable with it. She got very.
What did she think when she saw the movie? Was she like, man, I'm free with this movie?
She was brutal.
Yeah, well, she and I both were big fans of Pam Grier and blaxploitation cinema anyway, and so it was kind of like, I mean, I knew that this wasn't a blaxploitation movie, but it had sort of echoes. You put a gun, in the hands of a black woman, it has a specific quality to it. I knew she would do something different with it too, but yeah, we were fans of all those, movies and Coffee and Foxy Brown and films like Cleopatra Jones and all those things. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, this is our spin, on that. So she I think she lapped it up. She was like, awesome, I get to shoot people, which is
one thing I love is the beach scene where they go to the beach and they dig up the sand and they show somebody they've killed recently. That was that was obviously somebody like you put some makeup on and buried them. That was fun. That was like one take. I like that.
Yeah, that actor, again, it's like, it's simple when you're doing it in pieces, but when you have like, 5 minutes of lead up, that means that guy's got to be basically buried, in makeup, waiting, in all those scenes where somebody is being killed, they're all basically pre-made up, staged somewhere. So like in the gas station robbery, this whole long, they're casing it, they pull up, they have the whole thing with the attendant and blah blah blah, and then finally the guy comes out of the thing shot up. Well, he's just, he's been waiting for his cue the whole time, and so, and it got very complicated later, like in the video store, robbery, because we had do you guys know about that gag with how we did the woman shot behind the counter, the cash register?
Oh, actually, no. We would love to hear about it though.
Yeah, well, that's like it was basically, again, like what we had hired this guy Jeffrey Lyle Siegel, who had done the special makeup effects for Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, and which was shot in Chicago, and he was a Chicago native, and we were right next door to Chicago, basically. So we hired him to do the special makeup, but it was still challenging, just as it was for the actors. It was super challenging for him because a makeup effect is really dependent on a specific angle to make it work, a specific length of time, and also it's usually shot to be technically friendly for whoever is doing the effect, right? So, but in this case, you got these big wide shots where people are being shot. Like, so where is he going to be? Where is he going to hide? So in that particular sequence, the store manager comes out and he is shot first. And so there you see there's like a squib, which is an old-fashioned like blood gag, with a tube. But that tube had to be like 10 feet long and like around the corner in the back room so that he could pump it, right? But what happens is when the camera pans back, the girl behind the counter is all shot up behind the counter, and there's no cut there. I mean, there's not even a whip. So the question most people have is like, well, how the hell how is she shot up? That doesn't make any, like, how did you do that? And the way we did it was that we had we found these twins that are in identical wardrobe. One is pre-made up with bullet holes and blood and is hiding behind the counter the whole scene, from when they're outside and the whole talking, all that stuff is, her twin is hiding. So the second the camera pans away to the guy getting plugged, the one sister went down, the other went up with the blood. And so when the camera pans back, you now see the shot up person. And it was like an old magic trick. You just use the twin, like,
that's very creative. I would have never
Well, again, it was one of those circumstances where as a director, I'm kind of like, how am I gonna, like, I figured out how I could do the car, but I was trying to figure out, like, how am I gonna shoot the woman? I wanted it to be creative. I wanted her to be shot in the face. I thought that would be more savage. And I always kept thinking of, like, is there time for her to, like, splatter? Like, how can I do this? Because it can't be too long. It won't make any sense. You'll give it away. And again, Mick was kind of like, well, I've met these twins. And I was like, wait a minute, like, well, I was like, you have twins? Can they act? And so it was just that sort of like, that's presented this sort of solution to it. But yeah, when you're making a movie, when you kind of like commit to a concept, like it's all going to be like in one shot, as if a videographer is just capturing it. It's a great idea when you're conceiving it. Like, got me excited, and I wrote the movie. But then it was like, when you have to shoot it, it's kind of like, oh my God, like it was a lot more complicated, because of that, staying faithful to that. So
I do love how the movie like kind of grabs you and doesn't let go after a certain point. Like, so by the time that ending scene comes up and the cops, like similar to like the show Cops, shows up and they're filming them, the tables are turned, and it's just this brutal scene. And like the whole time we were just like, I mean, I don't
know. I was like, how is he going to get out of this? I mean, yeah. How's he get? Because you want to see Danny Bonaduce's character make it, and you're like, man, how's he going to get his way out of this?
Yeah, and then the tension builds. Like the way, one thing you're a master at many things. One of the things is building tension as the movie goes on, and we love doing that.
Oh, thanks.
You want things to get.
You're like, we're like, you're just kind of like watching through your fingers at the end of some of your movies, because you have no idea what's going to happen. Especially like, I mean, even Wild Things 2 was the similar. So that was one thing, just anxiety inducing, and you're just like, it doesn't let you go. And then by the time Danny Bonaduce covers up the lens, you have no idea, is it going to end here? I mean, like, this is crazy. And then it does. And you're
I thought that was a really cool way to end it. Him just turning the camera off.
Yeah.
That was a really cool kind of just detail.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's kind of the flip of, no, thanks very much. Well, I think as a filmmaker, you're always worried about, like, is this going to be, is it going to work? Is it going to be boring? Is it going to, how do you sustain interest, but yeah, I think for the ending, it was really just, it kind of was, and I just arrived at that it would be really interesting. And probably, probably in the back of my head when I think about it, is probably something like Coppola's conversation was probably in my head, because as you said, the tables are sort of turned, and this person who was obnoxiously getting in everybody's face, his wife's face, about filming is now being watched, and he does the thing that the last thing he's going to do, which is like stop filming, when his whole thing has been like film, right? So I remember the end of the conversation, if you've seen it, with Gene Hackman, his whole thing as a audio surveillance guy, that he's constantly prying into people's lives sonically. And at the end of the movie, he's sitting in a room again under a microscope, knowing that he's been bugged, and he's torn his whole apartment apart, and he's still like trapped by this technology that he's been sort of weaponizing against other people. So I guess something like that was in there. But also, like to what we were saying earlier, it is like it's a downbeat 70s style ending, even though the movie is made in 1991. It is it's those films that I saw that inspired that kind of thing. It's like, Gloria dies, Danny's all fucked up, it's not a happy thing. It's just everybody's dead and that's it, it's over. And I also think that is that is like when I was in my 20s when I made that movie. That's like very much a young man's, at least my perception of a good ending, which was always that, almost like if it's a happy ending, it's no good. Like I almost had this like attitude, which is a much more youthful sort of like, it's only good if it's like a tragedy. Whereas by the time I made like something like Some Guy Who Kills People, I was old enough to be like, please let it turn out okay. I don't want everybody to die at the end, and I think that just comes with age. At a certain point, life is so fucked up that at a certain point you're like, can someone please can it please turn out okay, for once. But at that point, I was with you, and I'm like, yeah, that's the ending. It needs to be down.
There is an ambiguous level to it, like what's going to happen next,
and it just shuts.
Is he going to get in trouble? That sort of thing. Yeah, and I like abrupt endings are fun.
And then the twist,
because it leaves people thinking about it afterwards.
Then you kind of relate to him in a way, because it becomes a twisted romance in a way, because he does fall in love with this girl. And
more out of pity for her.
I think you really can relate to Danny Bonaduce's character. Also, just a side note, that Wendy's on the overpass, we'd never heard of a restaurant.
Oh yeah, we were
on an there's a shot where there's a Wendy's on an overpass.
Oh right, yeah.
Never in my life have I seen a restaurant or a building on an overpass. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. I think I did that. I think, well, what happened was when I was driving, we had to drive from LA, where Melina and I were living, to Wisconsin, where we were going to shoot the movie, right? And so, because I had written that Danny's character is on a road trip after catching his wife and filming everything, I decided to grab shots during the actual trip as if he was shooting them. So when I saw something that was remotely interesting, I think probably I was like, what the fuck is that? Like a Wendy's on an overpass or whatever. So I was kind of stealing shots that I knew could kind of pass for his road trip, or at least transitional sort of bits.
One of the I guess before we move on to the next movie, we did want to remember to ask you, like, was there a lot of ADR involved afterward, with Danny, because of maybe those shots were filmed by you or someone else?
Right.
ADR and then like I said, a lot of these perspective shots
system or anything.
You don't see Danny in a lot of these perspective shots.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's very astute. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we actually yes, there were certain, because Danny is only in specific moments where he's on camera, we could shoot those sequences without him. And so, yeah, we just kind of, because we had Danny for like, I forget what it was, like a week and a half or something like that. So we scheduled everything for his on-camera stuff and shot that stuff out. And then anything that where he wasn't in, I mean, there were plenty of scenes where we could shoot with him there, even if he wasn't on camera, and we just mic'd him and we didn't have to loop it. But for those scenes, and I'm trying to remember now which ones they might have been, there might have been some scenes in the van, like for example, like in the opening scene where after he's captured, there's a shot of Melina like holding the gun on him, and they're talking to him as if he's like stuck in the van. And that was probably a circumstance where Danny was not there, but there are key 3 or 4 responses that he has to give that we just had him do, in post. But we did, I think it's a good tip for filming. I mean, it's like, even when you're dealing with ultra low budget, one of the places that you do want to put money, if you have anything, is in production sound recording. And we did, even back then, we definitely dedicated a piece of the budget to hiring a professional sound recordist who, fully, boomed that thing properly. And so the majority, 99% of it is just the production sound. And we didn't really loop anything for any on-camera stuff. But we did replace some stuff.
Nice.
With Danny.
And this movie will end on one of our favorite quotes: "Is you really should get that slushy machine fixed." we feel like you probably, I don't know if that was like improvised, or was there any improvisation or anything? Did they have to stick to the script, or? Yeah,
well, I mean, the script was I could at some point. I mean, the script is actually supposed to be on the disc, but the upcoming disc, the shooting script. Yeah, there were scenes that were definitely improvised, but what I try to do is improvise them, do the improvisations in rehearsal, and then commit the improvisation to paper, and then do that. You know what I mean? And that's something I learned from Scorsese. It was kind of like, yeah, there are definitely benefits to improvisation, but if you're relying upon that magic to happen while you're rolling, that doesn't often happen. But if you can get actors together and that you start fooling around with stuff, you can capture some stuff and then go, that was great, let's use that and put that. So there were certain things that we did that were added or improvised, later.
Yeah, but good job. It's definitely a groundbreaking movie. It's
I mean, like, it stood the test of time. It's hard to do that with any movie. I mean, there's Spielberg.
Oh, that's cool.
Spielberg movies that no one ever talks about. Like, it's just, it's
great. It's getting a Blu-ray release.
We're excited about that. We're big.
Yeah, I'll let you guys know about that, because that's coming up, and it was cool to kind of get everybody together again after 30 years and talk about it. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we'll go chronologically here. Let's talk about Hercules, season 1, episode 12, The Gauntlet.
Right.
Obviously, like, highest rated show on cable at the time. I mean, I think in like 500 countries or something. I remember reading things to say. And Kevin Sorbo at the height of his fame, obviously. I'm sure he was interesting to work with. And it was a crossover episode, like you said. It introduced Xena
in it. Yeah.
I remember it was before the spinoff, so obviously it implanted Xena into the ethos of that.
Wait, that was before Xena's show?
Yeah. Her show was like this. Yeah, I remember watching it as a kid, and then we always loved that show. So
we had like a few Xena figures growing up.
So like, what's just
that's cool.
It's a good memory from filming that you have.
I mean, it was the first sort of like professional, being hired by like a studio, and Sam Raimi was the executive producer, and it was Universal Studios that was producing it, and I was going to have to go to New Zealand, to shoot it where we were filming it.
Wow. And
I was like the youngest, person on the crew, and it was mostly Kiwis, because when they were shooting in New Zealand, they were using mostly a Kiwi kind of crew, and everyone was very cool, but I was very nervous because I just wanted it to go well. So I heavily storyboarded that movie. I storyboarded a lot. It didn't necessarily work for America's Deadliest, because that was kind of impractical because of the way it was shot. But pretty much everything I do up to this point, I heavily storyboard. So I was like super duper prepared. But one story is that on the first day of shooting, it was the first thing we had to shoot was a scene where Hercules steps into a booby trap. So it's a moment where it was like this crazy rig where it was like a log on a pendulum that like he turns around, somebody cuts a rope, and this pendulum swings down, and like hits him, and he goes flying, that kind of thing. So it was a gag. And actually, before I had made this episode, I'd actually shot second unit for the Hercules movies. There were like 3 or 4 Hercules made for television movies that preceded the series, right? So I was hired as the action unit director for Hercules and the Circle of Fire, which was one of the movies there.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had been on set and I had done all these gags, with stunts and everything, but that was as a second unit director. That wasn't, as the director, of the episode per se. So I was nervous. But anyway, on that first day, as I was starting to set up this booby trap scene, I started to get really like nervous and nauseous, and I tried to camouflage it. So I said to the first AD, I said, "Listen, I gotta step off for a minute because I gotta work out how I'm going to shoot this." But really, I was just going, and we were outside in the woods. I just went like down around behind a rock and just puked, because I was so nervous. I came back and I was like, I thought nobody had seen me. I was like, yeah, okay, okay, let's do it, So now cut to like 20 years later, nobody said anything. Nobody said, "Oh, Jack, are you okay?" Because I figured I was cool. Like I just totally hid this. And then 20 years later, I was in a bookstore and there was a book called like Hercules Exposed, like a behind the scenes book. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm in this, my ego. I'm like, oh, look in oh, there I am. And I flipped it open and the thing starts with like a quote from Sorbo going, "Poor Jack, he was so nervous. He went into the bushes and puked his guts out and everyone felt so sorry for him." So, but actually, that I think most, I heard a story about Peckinpah, like, heaving his guts out, because he was so like, like, I want this to be good. So I felt like, well, okay, if Peckinpah can puke, then it's okay if I puke too. So that's the first thing that sort of comes to mind. Yeah. So that, and also I think also working with Anthony Quinn was sort of like an interesting thing. Although actually Anthony Quinn was not in that episode. He was in the second unit stuff. That was like a big deal because like Anthony Quinn is like this massive, classic Hollywood movie star, and he was playing Zeus.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, oh my God, like, and I remember I had to direct Anthony Quinn hurling a thunderbolt, or something like that. And it was just surreal because I was like a 20-something kid, and there's this like, titan of cinema, and I'm telling him, Tony, you gotta bring your arm back, So yeah, but also Lucy was super cool. She was somebody who was a last minute replacement for who they had actually cast for Xena. She was a local New Zealander.
Yeah,
and she had been in a bunch of these other, like she had been like an Amazon in one of like Hercules and the Amazon Women, which was another like TV movie of the week that we had done prior. And they had cast an American woman. I can't remember who it was, but she was an American. She was going to play Xena. And then at the last second, she freaked because of the amount of sort of horseback, or what do you call it, equestrian, skill or whatever. I guess she had lied and said that she could really ride. And when she couldn't, and she panicked and she backed out. And so as a last minute replacement, they said, oh, remember Lucy? She was one of the Amazons. Let's stick her in. And she just kind of took to it. Like, like she was just great at it. So that was a lot of fun making those, it was like old sword and sandal, kind of.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean,
it's that Xena show in Hercules. I mean, I was at Walmart the other day and they've got the entire series of Xena there. And,
that's wild.
It's still a lot of physical media in stores again, but the fact that that's there just shows the staying power it has. That's really cool.
Speaking as two kids that were the key demographic for shows like that, especially for the younger crowd, because I know everybody watched it, but Lucy Lawless was just like goddess like figure. We had all our action figures. Clearly, I remember in second grade I had this Xena figure, and there was a girl I had
keep it in his backpack.
There was a girl I had a crush on named Shelby Butchery, and every day I would pull out, right before we were waiting for the buses on the carpet, I would pull out Xena's action figure. We'd play with Xena and we'd like chit chat, and it was like this fun thing.
Well, here, I got something for you. Hang on a second here. Let's see. I didn't anticipate taking this out, but since you guys are such fans, so I took one sort of souvenir from my shooting the pilot for Xena.
Oh man, holy!
We had the toy.
We had that toy.
Yeah,
like the toy version.
We had the little toy of that. Holy crap!
Holy crap, man!
So yeah, so this is actually like just painted rubber, and because it needed to be stuff that could like hang off people's heads and stuff. But it's funny because this weapon in the original script, it wasn't the chakram sort of frisbee boomerang thing at all. It was just like, it was very unspecific in the original script. It was like she throws this weapon, and it was kind of like the writer didn't know what it was going to be. And I remember I was living in Studio City in the Valley in LA, and I was talking to my friend Adam Glass, who ended up becoming like a big, huge showrunner for shows like Supernatural and everything. But at the time, he was like unemployed, but a huge comic book fan. And I was saying, what is this weapon? What can we do with this weapon? I got to figure this out because I'm going to have to shoot this thing. And he was a big, I think it was either, I can't remember because I wasn't a big reader of The Flash, but I think he was talking about is it The Flash who has the baton? That I don't even know. But there was a comic book character that threw a baton that would come back like a boomerang. And so that started to kind of get the wheels turning. And I knew I wanted to have a moment in this episode where she she threw this thing and it kind of went like a billiard shot, like it hit somebody and then flew and hit somebody else and then ricocheted off a wall. And so that's sort of how it came to be. But it's interesting how those things work, because it was just kind of like, oh yeah, how about this? And then I sort of floated it to the producers and they're like, that's cool. And then somebody builds it and then it's a toy, like years. Of course, there's no paper trail leading back to us figuring it out, but it's kind of like, it's weird how these things just sort of happen, and then if they work, then they become, something you remember.
My mind's just kind of blown, like seeing that again, because I hadn't thought about that toy in so long. And the fact that you had a hand in it, like,
and then
we actually had that toy ring growing up. I used to play with it. I'm sure,
that's so fun.
Still somewhere at my family's house.
That's Xena's go-to weapon. So that's awesome. Just being a part of that folklore of like Hercules and Xena, which was like the powerhouse of cable television in the 90s and like onto the early 2000s. That's awesome. So that's
it was a lot of fun doing that show.
Man, we grew up on all that. That's really cool to hear.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think about that because I think when I was doing the episode, it's funny because when I was doing the episode, which has the gauntlet has this sort of Hercules Xena fight.
I remember you down the whole episode.
Yeah. So I remember my friend Adam, again, who we had talked about this weapon idea. He was like, yeah, this is like your $6 million man versus Bigfoot, which for my generation, like the $6 million man was sort of the equivalent tonally of Hercules and Xena.
Yeah.
And there was a classic like $6 Million Man episode where he fights Bigfoot, and it was kind of like this, so it was kind of like, that was sort of like, and it's interesting. It's still interesting to like, because I've been teaching filmmaking for, I don't know if I told you guys, for like the last 12 years I've been a professor concurrently with my filmmaking. That's and awesome. Even just the other day I was teaching a class, and one of my students was like you guys, it's like of an age where that was like a key show when they were kids, and so like couldn't believe that I had anything to do with this thing that, and I feel the same way. Like when I meet somebody who did something like that was that formative, it's like blows me away, because it's so interesting. So because when you're of a certain age, certain things just stick, like make a big impression and make a huge impression. And sometimes you can't even go back. I think sometimes it's hard to go back. Like I look at some shows that I was like obsessed with now, and I'm like, wow, that's not so good. So I think it's almost like it's all context. Like when you see something is almost as important as whatever the thing is. It's like those two things sort of come together.
Exactly. And then going back to even more things that we were obsessed with.
Remember the story. So he had the Xena in his backpack every day. Every day when we were waiting on the buses, he'd play with this girl. And then like it was the weekend came around, and we were playing with the figure with our brother Zeph in our driveway or something. And what did he hit?
He hit it with a golf club.
Hit it with a golf,
and her leg came off.
And her leg came off. And he and I are just losing our minds. Like
you asshole!
Like 8 years old.
So he's like, "Don't worry about it." He takes a hammer.
He takes a hammer and a nail, and he tries to nail the leg back on.
And then her head pops off while he's doing that.
Oh my god!
So that Monday at the end of the school day, she's like, "Hey, you got Xena?" And I was like, "No."
He was traumatized. It's like that just ended his little Xena
ended
connection.
the little Xena connection.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Back to another obsession of the 90s and 2000s. Walker, Texas Ranger. We watched that last night. We tracked it down on YouTube.
We found a YouTube rip of your making of that had like.
Oh, weird. Oh God, I forgot all about that.
It's like an hour-long TV special.
It was really cool. Yeah, yeah.
And like one thing that just it just shined a light on all the crazy, ambitious stunts and sequences of that show that you never. Because I mean, you watch the show and you're like, this is so.
We're filming a movie every week.
It's so over the top.
Movie level stunts and explosions and helicopter cars and stuff.
You're making of really like shined a light on like the danger. I mean, like he's really driving all those cars. The Barracuda being chased by like a helicopter and machine guns. Sorry, we got our blind Basset here on the floor.
He just kind of showed up a minute ago.
Oh, that's cool. No, I'm a huge animal person, so more the merrier.
But yeah, so like shining a light on TV's toughest cop, right? I mean,
well, that was like like one of the things that I did a lot of when I was trying to get right after America's Deadliest Home Video and sort of into Xena, but then even after Xena and even after The Big Empty, I would make a lot of behind the scenes or making of documentaries, as a job, as a film, as a director. I would do these things. So some of the first things I ever did were the sort of making of docs for a lot of movies. So I did not just for like Walker, Texas Ranger, which that's why I was hired to do that, because I had done it before, but I did like the making of the Flintstones and Carlito's Way and Hard Target and Grumpy Old Men and all these. So I was on a lot of sets doing these interviews with the directors and the cast and filming the productions. And those were like really, it was almost like sort of like a graduate school kind of thing, because I was even though I was making these documentaries, I was totally observing all these different filmmakers, in action. So so the Walker, Texas Ranger thing was interesting, because it was like, because I had, in high school, I was watching Chuck Norris movies, and I was watching Missing in Action and Invasion USA and Lone Wolf McQuade and all these movies. So it was cool to work with him, and meet him at that time when he was still sort of,
our dog is attacking
you continue
our dog's getting into the trash can now.
Okay.
He's gonna go put him on another couch. Yeah.
No, that's cool.
So Walker, Texas Ranger, like was it cool working? Were you there like filming the behind the scenes stuff and the interviews? Nice. So
all that stuff. Yeah, that was basically, that's basically how those things would work, is that you would I'd usually have a crew. I'd have a cameraman and a sound man, and then I would direct the filming of the behind the scenes stuff, and then I would conduct the interviews, with the actors or the writers, directors, and all that stuff. So it was interesting. That was weird, because that was a weird period where they were shooting all television shows. Like when I shot Xena, and this is just true for most television shows up to a certain year, were shot on 35 millimeter film. They were all shot on basically, like on movie film, right? And that was the format. And obviously this predates any kind of digital filmmaking. But then there was a period where they realized that they could save money if they shot 16 millimeter instead of 35 millimeter. And so Panavision actually had made these 16 millimeter Panavision cameras that it was really cool. So I remember on Walker, they were transitioning over to this 16 millimeter, because by the time, this is pre high definition television.
Yeah.
If you take 16 millimeter film and transfer it to video and air it, no one's going to really know the difference between that and 35, which is so weird, because now when they remaster old television shows, like they go back and they do Gomer Pyle or whatever, they're going into 35 millimeter negative, and you're seeing like these shows like Green Acres or whatever, like they're 3D. They have so much more detail, because they were never meant. No one ever saw them, because no one ever went back to the source material. So, but yeah, that was mostly just cool because of Chuck, because I was a Chuck fan.
It was like a shot of some. I guess you might have, directed this shot, but it was a shot of the cameraman hanging outside of a chopper by a freaking belt. Like Phil,
yeah,
and he's like holding the barn doors on the camera. Like that's
right.
Man, they were really some dangerous.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I mean, like stunt people and people who shoot stunts are similarly crazy. Like they're like adrenaline junkies. And they do pretty wild stuff. I mean, I've seen stunt people do some pretty crazy stuff.
That show, what they were doing on that show was just unheard of
like
in television.
you really showcased all the biggest like stunt. I mean, it was only 3 seasons in, but you really showcased all like the biggest things.
Yeah. Well, that's the job, the job, like when the network is like, we want to get more ratings, then it becomes like, well, let's make a show about the show and make it sound, and that's pretty much what and make it look like it's the most amazing thing ever. I mean, the show did try to do, bigger scale stuff than you would normally see. But yeah, those were fun to make. In many ways, that's kind of like what led to a lot of the jobs I did, because I had done, like a really sort of turbocharged making of John Woo's first American movie, Hard Target, which was with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So I'd done the making of that, and I had really profiled Woo as this sort of action maestro. Yeah. And I had been a fan of his Hong Kong movies when they weren't really available to American, but like I had like searched out, Bullet in the Head and The Killer and all these things when it was still like dubbed or still in in Chinese. But that was seen, but Hard Target was produced by Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert, who did Hercules. So it was like my introduction to them was there seeing my making of documentary. And then they were like, "Oh, what have you done?" And then they saw America's Deadliest. "Oh, why don't you come to New Zealand and do the second unit?" And then so sometimes things kind of ping off of that. So, and so when I needed work to do, I was between movies and all of a sudden they needed a Walker, Texas Ranger documentary. Well, I had already done something like that with like Hard Target and some of the other action things. So it was kind of like, oh, good. And then the extra benefit is like, yeah, I am a fan of Chuck, so I get to go meet Chuck and hang out and see how they do that show. Yeah, so there's been a lot of those things, over the years where you just kind of do these crazy jobs, but it's always better if there's something personal that you like, things like an actor you admire or filmmaker you admire that you can interact with. Yeah.
You did the making of for the Flintstones?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Is that the one that's on the DVD?
I don't know. See, what happens is that I used to work for the studio. Like I worked for a production company that was hired by the studio to make these specifically. And what they would do is we would cut together a documentary, but then all the raw material that I shot would be made available to other people who were doing things. So I'm not sure. I don't know if that's the one on the DVD, but certainly like if there's behind the scenes, like if you see them with the Henson puppets and all that stuff, that stuff that I shot, I don't know if that is edited the way I did it, but yeah, but I was like there forever shooting like everything on that show. Like there was tons of stuff on the Flintstones.
Our first Flintstones is an awesome movie.
We used to go to this summer academy for like acting and just filmmaking. Our first film teacher ever was Rod Daniel, director of Teen Wolf, K9, Beethoven's Second.
Yeah,
and,
right.
The Super with Joe Pesci. So he brings in a VHS and it's this like hour-long making of that Universal put out for Beethoven's Second, but it's nowhere on any of the DVDs and things like that.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe there's like licensing things. I don't know. But it sounds like kind of the way Universal handled a lot of those things back then is they would produce these things and you wouldn't necessarily like have them on
I'm
the
sure
DVD,
they definitely used your footage,
but they would use all this stuff over.
Correct. Yeah. They used to make, what they would do is they would call it an EPK or an electronic press kit, which meant that it was like, like if somebody wanted to write a review or article about the Flintstones, they would get a press kit and it would have like posters and photographs and stuff. And they just took this another step further. Like if you were going to do something on the local news reviewing the Flintstones, or you wanted to do, they would hand over all of this material, interviews and behind the scenes, and people could kind of cobble it together however they wanted. But we were also obligated to put together our own documentary, and wherever that showed up, I don't know. But like if you go to like, pretty sure like there's on YouTube, there's like an old like the making of Hard Target, which is the one I did. So yeah, but they were always really interesting because I mean I'm still a fan. And funny, just before I was like going to sit down with you, I was looking at on YouTube. There's a long hour-and-a-half interview with Brian De Palma specifically about Blowout, where he's being interviewed by Noah Baumbach about Blowout and every little thing about Blowout. And to this day, even having made tons of these things, like that's what I'm interested in. Like I want to hear how the filmmakers did what they did. You know, that if you're a filmmaker, you want to know, you know, from the horse's mouth, like what were they thinking? Like, how do they tackle this? And so behind the scenes stuff has always been something that I'm super interested in. Yeah.
We eat that stuff up. We love behind the scenes stuff. That's why it was so much fun watching the Wild Things and then watching that behind the scenes of Wild Things.
Right. Right. And they did a good job with that one too. That was fun. And that was also weird for me too, because again, like those, you know, that was one of the first times where there was like a behind the scenes crew filming me doing everything, where just a second ago I was filming them. So I was always very, you know, I was like kind of was weirded out by that, because I was like, weird. Usually I'm shooting, so you're shooting me. All right. So but yeah, I mean, I just loved it. I mean, obviously the great, there are a couple of like great making of documentaries, like the company that I worked for, where I made all these behind the scenes documentaries, had done what I think is the definitive making of documentary, which is Hearts of Darkness, which is the making of Apocalypse Now. Yes. You know, which is such like a candid, sort of inside baseball. Like this is it, warts and all. You know, filmmaking warts and all.
Yeah, with the movie.
Right.
Issues they had,
and that was like a you know, an Oscar level documentary, full length movie. It wasn't just like a behind the scenes thing.
Right. That's like a full, like, exactly. That's like a real, like, and there are a couple of movies like that. You know, there's another one, Lost in La Mancha, about Terry Gilliam trying to make Don Quixote for the first time and how it all falls apart. And but yeah, you know, like I eat that stuff up, you know, like, or there's a great one on Blade, like in the original, one of the Blade Runner, 11 million Blade Runner releases, there's a documentary called Dangerous Days, which is like 5 hours. And for me, it's still, I would watch that for 10 hours. You know, I would just like, so if you're a nerd, you know, if you're a movie geek, there's never enough of that stuff, you know?
Yeah. So you're on the set of, like, you know, Flintstones. Are you like thinking, man, this movie's going to be like the hit of the season? Like, because it was like one of the highest grossing movies, I think,
of the year
when it came out. And then you got Rick Moranis, perfect casting all around. I mean, we all know that Rosie O'Donnell was kind of more of a stunt casting situation.
People kind of criticized her casting,
but at the same time,
she did a great job.
At the same time, you know, she did a great job. Like, what was it like thinking, wow, this movie, like you're filming, you're like, man, this movie.
Did you think it would be as big as it was?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's funny because I think a lot of people were kind of like, how's this even going to work? Like, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do this as a live action? You know, again, it was like the Flintstones was such a specific world. So translating that, and it was weird going out to like the set, like they shot a lot of it out at Vasquez Rocks, which is a famous, I mean, you probably heard of this location, but it's a famous kind of, 45-degree rock formations it's been used in every Western and Star Trek and everything you ever heard of, because it has these very distinctive sort of rock formations. And they built bedrock and the quarry, and, you know, they had Henson, I don't know if Henson built the Brontosaurus, but they had full scale Brontosaurus, you know, all that stuff. But the funny thing, and they built all the houses and everything, but what's interesting is that it's still, you're kind of in daylight, like in Southern California, you know what I mean? It is sort of like, it's like tonally, it's very different from the show, you know, so I didn't know what I was thinking. I knew the casting was good. And John Goodman was particularly, you know, I was a fan of his. Funny enough, funny story is that when I did Rick Moranis's interview for that movie, he was very, like, he wanted to know exactly what questions were going to be asked beforehand. And he was very measured in how he answered things and responded to them. And he was very uptight. And I was wondering, I never met anybody like that was that like uptight about this kind of stuff. And the reason is because, to what we were talking about before, he had given an interview, or he had been interviewed for something, and they had taken his stuff, like the EPK kit they had taken it out of context and used it in a news report when John Belushi died. And they used what he was saying about John Belushi's character in a movie that he was in with him or something, making it sound like he was talking about John. So it was kind of these things where it was like, because all this stuff is out there at the time and anybody can cut it together the way they wanted to, he was like hyper, you know, vigilant about, you know, like, I want to make sure that what I say is only connected to this movie and can't be used. So I was, in the beginning, I was kind of like, why is he so uptight? But no, I mean, I didn't know. I mean, the big deal for me was that I had to get an interview with Elizabeth Taylor, who plays Wilma's mother.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a huge deal because Elizabeth Taylor hadn't made a movie in years, and this was like a big deal. And Elizabeth Taylor at the time was still considered like the reigning, queen of Hollywood. And she was a real pain in the ass because when I had to do her interview, she was just like, she didn't want to say anything. She just didn't want to, like, they're actors, like most actors know that this is part of the job. Like, I've got to be enthusiastic. I've got to like talk about the character and all this stuff. And she was just kind of like, and just would not answer any of my questions. It was really like pulling teeth. And finally, she gave me like one line. She says, "Yeah, I play the mother-in-law from hell." And that was the one quote that got wound up in everything because it was the one complete thought that she had, that was usable. But anyway, yeah.
How was John Goodman? Was he nice?
Yeah, he was super nice. Super nervous himself because he was doing he was filming Roseanne at the same time. So it was almost like with Back to the Future with like Michael J. Fox was like making Family Ties at night and then coming and shooting like days on. It was like crazy. So I think he was super nervous. And I remember there's a dance sequence in that movie where Fred has to dance. And I remember shooting them rehearsing this thing, and he couldn't get the dance moves right. And I remember there was this moment where he had kind of like this really self-critical, like, almost like a Chris Farley, like he hit himself kind of like this because he wasn't getting the dance moves right. And I was kind of like, whoa, that's, you don't imagine John Goodman getting upset like that, but he was like, he wanted it to be right, and he was obviously overworked. And
yeah,
so it's interesting when you see stuff like that. You're like, people are just, movies are, it's not like digging ditches. It's pretty easy work, but it is like, when you take it seriously, you can kind of you take it seriously, and if stuff doesn't work, you can get very upset about that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, and I know John Goodman as an actor, he's done a lot of interviews. He's really hard on himself. He's had a rough time.
Yes.
With like, he's, I know he's admitted to drinking a little too much in his life and having a lot of personal issues because of that. And it's a shame to know that he has been hard on himself, but the dedication he had really shows through. I mean, he was jacked in that movie.
Oh, you saw how like big his arms were.
I mean, he got an amazing
really worked out for that movie. Yeah,
he had the voice right. It's just like, we had. I mean, I got all the Fred Flintstone dolls. We had the Rick Moranis dolls growing up. We got all those figures. That was just
right.
We got a Kyle MacLachlan figure somewhere. But before we move on to The Big Empty, Pacino, what was it like, Carlito's Way with Pacino?
Shooting the
Oh, well, that was kind of like more like kind of get out of the way, like with certain actors, like there's certain actors that are just, at least at that time, Pacino was pretty much like, he does, you didn't see too many sit down interviews with him. So that was pretty much just observing like De Palma do his thing, which was for me really, really cool. But then there are other people like like when I did Hard Target, like people like Lance Henriksen are just like super duper cool. Jean-Claude Van Damme wouldn't shut up promoting, he's like a soundbite machine. So there are a lot of actors that most actors are pretty cool. But I didn't actually do anything with Pacino because he was like, that's not in my contract. That's not in my contract. I don't have to do that kind of thing.
Nice. So on to The Big Empty. We watched that a bit
a few nights ago. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Obviously, James McManus was the
star.
You
worked with on a lot of stuff. He wrote the Walker, Texas Ranger behind the scenes, and he wrote La Cucaracha. Did you guys go to school together, or were you guys friends?
Yes, we were best friends. We went to school together, and we had written together a horror movie that right after film school that didn't get made, but we had sort of bonded in this sort of writer director, at least in those days. That was sort of like our sort of approach, that he would write, we would kind of come up with the ideas, he would write it, I would direct it, and then if possible he would act in those movies too, because he was also an actor. So we actually wrote La Cucaracha first and tried for a while to get that going, and we almost got it made with William Hurt and Raul Julia. Like there was a moment there where like that was almost going to happen, and I actually met with William Hurt about the movie, and then it didn't happen, which happens with a lot of movies. And then we realized it was just taking too long, and we were not going to get this thing made right away. So we kind of said, well, what can we do that's smaller and more sort of can we raise the money to do something smaller? It's not in Mexico with all this stuff. And so again, kind of going back to our love of 70s cinema, and in particular, there's Robert Altman did an adaptation of The Long Goodbye, which is Raymond Chandler, one of Raymond Chandler's books, the Philip Marlowe character, and his version of The Long Goodbye, Altman's was like a favorite of ours. And there was something in that was sort of like, can we kind of enter that world? Can we do something in the sort of the private eye genre that sort of deconstructs the private eye genre?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So that's what we did, and that's what so that was a purely independent movie. You know, I think we did it for $150,000 in LA in 1996. I think it was. Yeah, that's when we shot it.
Yeah, 97.
A lot of good dialogue in that movie.
Yeah,
it's like that hard-boiled detective, and we also liked how everything wasn't really explained. It kind of leaves the audience to kind of like, why is this guy this way? Why are this weird couple he gets caught up with this
film
way?
noir, and he's
very film noir.
And we love how he's just kind of as confused like by like this weird couple he's come across, but he's also fascinated and like obsessed with them, and he becomes a part of their life because he's so new, I think, in the detective game.
He's also just so needy. He wants these people to he wants these people to just give him anything, whether it's to talk to him or to punch him in the face. You know, I thought that was
right. No, you're absolutely right. That's very perceptive. It's exactly, again, the kind of character that most people don't like in traditional movies. You know, he's needy, he's obsessive, he's kind of like, you know, he's not a completely likable character. He's got a lot of problems, and he's your lead, right? And so but that was the kind of like, those were the kind of movies that, again, like both Jim and I were like inspired by. So it was kind of like, yeah, that's what we want to do. And so, yeah, my work with Jim on both The Big Empty and La Cucaracha sort of have a very specific tone, because the way Jim writes dialogue and the way those stories are structured, I can't remember who wrote it. Maybe it was, we had a really nice review from Roger Ebert on La Cucaracha, who said something like, if you like a movie that evokes rather than explains, then this is a movie for you. Meaning that it doesn't like spell everything out. It's just kind of like,
nowadays everything's
that's like, it goes back to that, it has that 70s vibe, you know, not like even Chinatown, you know, like, you know,
right,
not everything's really just you know, it leaves the audience, it makes the audiences think, it makes the movie last in their mind, because they're still thinking about it. It's not all spelled out for them.
And then it's very much that film noir, very much a film noir.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, well, in terms of design, yes, very much so. I mean, that movie is just, you know, there's a lot of very noir expressionistic lighting designs, and the whole movie is deliberately sort of in a desaturated monochromatic palette, you know, trying to like take all the color out of it as much as almost make a black and white movie in color was sort of the idea. So all of that, and because it's a private eye movie, it's like all of those visual sort of archetypes are present, you know, through Venetian blind patterns and everything you ever heard of, which was great to do, because I love that stuff. So even though it's not a thriller per se, it's still extremely moody, and that's sort of what and similarly, you guys had mentioned like the Brady Bunch. That was sort of like the same approach too. It's like what if the behind the scenes of the Brady Bunch was like a noir? You know, that was sort of like how I was kind of looking at it.
Very character driven. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
And what we
noticed the Brady Bunch. The guy from The Big Empty was in the Brady Bunch. The guy who
Yes, Pablo Bryant, who is an old friend and a great actor, and I used him as the guy that Robert Reed picks up.
In
the bar. That's right. Yeah.
That was really cool in the Brady Bunch behind the scenes movie. It was bold to show like Robert Reed and not, you know, shy away from his gay lifestyle. Like there's a scene where he wakes up and there's a guy in his bed. You know, we thought that was pretty cool. And then, for the time specifically, especially.
I mean, we're definitely going to get in, but one thing your movies did touch on even in the 90s, which, you know, there was gay content, LGBT content, but your movies touched on themes that, you know,
a lot of people were kind of afraid, you know, to even go into it.
It's a time when like Rosie O'Donnell films now and then and her character's a lesbian, at the last second they take out any reference to her being a lesbian. This is the time of the 90s.
And she was, you know, she was dropped when she came out, you know, around that time.
So it's interesting that you didn't shy away from anything like that, which everyone in Hollywood was scared to do in a lot of your movies, including The Big Empty, including Gotcha.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
touched on those themes, and we think that was really cool. It
Yeah,
shows you as a very progressive filmmaker far before your time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. It definitely, you know, a lot of credit really does have to go to Jim, you know, for, you know, putting that content in there. You know, like when we were writing The Big Empty, the idea that, and in many ways, like the Lloyd character that Jim plays, the detective, is kind of like this pansexual character. Like it doesn't matter. It's like whoever is going to love me, I'm going to go there. And that idea really wasn't, that terminology didn't even exist. Let alone this idea that, you know, to be truthful, like the scene that when I finally looked at what he had written for this moment where they catch the Peter character, which is supposed to be him having an affair, when in fact he's making love to a dying man with cancer. That's what he films. Yeah. For me as a filmmaker, I was kind of like, the first time I read this, I was like, shit, this is heavy. And also I was very intimidated. I was like, how the fuck am I gonna, there's no precedent for this. Like I haven't filmed that. Like how am I gonna direct that? Like where's this coming from? So honestly, it scared me initially, not because of the content, but just how was I going to, like,
yeah, I mean, you were breaking
pull it off. How was I going to pull it off? Like, you know, with any kind of authority. So
breaking new ground in a way. Yeah.
Do it in such a way that it's not exploitive or anything like that too.
Right. I think that's really what it is. I mean, there's a very big difference between like that sex, or even if you can call it a sex scene, that scene in Big Empty, and say like Wild Things 2, where like the whole point of that like three-way is like the studio saying, we got to have a three-way and it's got to be hot, because the first one had one like that. So you do, you know, like that's the goal. In The Big Empty, it's meant to be disturbing, but not titillating. And it's meant to be disturbing because it's not what you expect, and it's not easy to wrap your head around, right? So it's like they're different kinds of different kinds of scenes, and it's much easier to do like just a simply, you know, it's not easy, but it's easier to do like a three-way and Wild Things than it is to do a scene between, you know, a loving, you know, social worker and a man dying of cancer, you know. So but yeah, no, and those themes, like you said, do sort of those themes are in La Cucaracha, because the whole character of Herberto and what is supposed to have happened, you know, is that's all in there too. And that's very much Jim, you know, like wanting to get those things in the material, and then it was on me to like hopefully find a way to make them work, you know.
One thing about, well, we got to talk about the last shot we liked of the movie.
Oh, the last shot.
And then how we liked about how, like what you said, how Lloyd's ping-ponging from the wife and the husband the whole movie.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't laughing so hard about that. Not because it was like funny or anything, but just like we just everybody's seen like those type of characters, like characters. We love movies where characters are barely able to function and even be normal enough to exist in a regular society.
Yeah, I wrote this down like
that's very true. And I feel that way myself. I mean, both Jim and I think like the reason why those characters come easily is because I think that we both feel very much like misfits in that way. You know, I think, and it's true. It's like anybody who is like, most artists are not like functional in the world. You know, that's why you do live in art, right? You know, it's like, and to this day, I remain dysfunctional, like as a person. I am functional when I work, you know, like in my film making, but in life I'm a fucking mess, you know. And that's like, I think that's a lot of us are like that. So it's easy to write characters that are sort of blundering their way through existence, because that's what I relate to, you know. That makes more sense to me than somebody who's got it all sorted. You know, I don't know what that's like, you know.
And you often do movies where outsiders and loners are outsiders and loners are a common theme.
They're like the, you know, front and center
leads of a lot of your movies.
Definitely. I mean, I absolutely. And even so, like, I know we're jumping ahead, but even something like when I was given this to do this Blast Vegas thing, I did an uncredited rewrite of the whole thing. And the biggest thing I did was I shifted. The movie was written like the heroes were like the frat guys and frat girls, and I was like, I don't give a shit about these people, you know, like who cares about the beautiful people? It's like, if I'm interested in anything in this stupid thing, it's going to be the misfits that should be the heroes, right? So I shifted the whole focus, so it would basically be the nerds are your heroes, because that's who I care about. I don't give a shit about any of these other people. So I try, you know, certainly if I can, I try to do that because that's what I'm interested in. People, that's who I relate to. You know, I don't relate to, you know, the popular people. I don't know what that is.
One of the shots we love at the end, not the very last shot, but one of them is where he's trying to record the married couple in their room, and and he's in the car, and then he looks up at the window, and they're just staring at him. We can't. That it really.
And don't explain it, but as the audience, you're like, oh, they're so weird. They just forgave each other, and they're back together.
Right.
Not even, they're so weird. They're not even going to talk to this guy. And
they're kind of alienating the guy who helped him.
Let him know, yeah, it's over. Leave. We found your recording device. Leave.
It was that's just one of my favorite shots. It's like in movie history because it's just like there's so much subtext to that.
Thank you.
Like
That's awesome.
So much left open for interpretation at the same time because you're like, God, he just really got involved with this weird ass couple and like just they took him on a ride, you know, and it was just I mean he's going out to
he'd been on another part of the state looking for her for days and she'd been
and he's
back.
like, oh, she came back about an hour after you left.
And they didn't even
That's right. Well, there's also a real victimization I mean, there's like something that both Jim and I also relate to is this idea of like, you know, being fucked over and being the victim. And, you know, I think that comes from, you know, if you grew up being bullied and things like that, that's like something that you identify with. So this idea that he went through all this trouble and they're just like, to your point, like, you know, thanks, you know, we're not even going to say goodbye. You know, it's just like, we're not even going to show up. I think that was one of the things that we changed because initially there was a final scene after that that we shot, which was a scene where Jane meets him in the park at the end and they do talk. But she still sort of just kind of like says, yeah, you know, I'm connected to my husband and, you know, whatever we had doesn't really mean anything. Goodbye. You know, it's like it was the same idea, but it was kind of a spoken version. And what we realized it would maybe be more effective to just like not even have her show up. You know, like she would just like not even show. Like she would say she would meet him and then just blow him off and he would be left there alone. And so I re-tinkered the ending so that we would, and with the voiceover so that she does. So it is this complete kind of just like, you know, it's all been for nothing and you just made this whole thing up in your in your mind
at the end of the movie waiting for either of them.
That last shot where he's alone and it, you know, it tilts up to the shot of the LA skyline was really cool. A good way to end it.
And how in a way he's still kind of just waiting for them to come back because he's just such a lost character.
Exactly.
Exactly. That was
but at the same time it's helped him because he says he's gone on to multiple cases and he's actually, you know, a decent private eye by the end of it. That was cool.
And you know, it starts out with one of his good friends dying in the convenience store.
Kind of gives him the incentive to just do something different.
You got this guy named Lloyd who's just a waiter, it gives him this like idea to change his life in a way, and then it starts this incredible journey. So that that movie really stuck with us.
Really liked it.
So
I'm so glad because it's like it's a lot of people haven't or don't talk about that movie, but for me personally, I think it's one of the best things I've done. I think it's just like you said, because it's character driven, because it's so atmospheric, and because it's like a more personal movie. Also, I just think filmically, I think when I look at it, I haven't looked in a long time, but when I remember it, I'm thinking of things that I just think I connected with that material. And when you connect with something personally, your best as a director, your best images, shots are going to come from that, you know, as opposed to like when you come to something, even like something like Xena or Wild Things 2, when you're coming at something for hire, you're trying to sort of shoehorn yourself into something that maybe isn't entirely you. And so I often find that the best work that I do is when it's like when I am sort of wedded, you know, to the material, if I can, you know, if I have that opportunity, you know. So yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, and I really am like grateful that you guys have taken the time to. That's a lot of viewing. You know, you guys are watching like everything, and I'm like, wow, shit, you guys really did your homework.
We watched everything, man. It's been watching something for the first time, but a lot of the stuff's been rewatching because I'm just somebody we've grown up watching. And one thing before we move on to La Cucaracha is the score of the Big Empty. We love the horns.
Yes.
It has
that 70s jazzy vibe to it.
Noirish. I mean, it's just
really cool.
You know,
noirish,
and then you got
50s kind of noir.
You got Jim doing like a kind of like a Humphrey Bogart-esque character in a way. I see a lot of good stuff there. So back to La Cucaracha, 1998. freaking Eric Roberts.
Right.
Amazing
I think that's Eric Roberts' best performance, because we're Eric Roberts fans. That was, you really pulled a great performance out of him.
Yeah. And
well, he was like, you know, again, it was kind of like, in many ways, it was sort of like the Danny thing, where like it didn't necessarily, we didn't write it for Eric, right? But when we finally got the chance to make the movie, which was with a company that was, I think it was a company that was a brand new company in LA that had like money for like a slate of movies. So they had like something like $10 million, and they were dedicating like 2 million to like 5 different movies. When it was picked as one of these movies in the slate, they had like an internal casting director who, in those days, any movie that was being made, you know, low budget, was looking to collect on the back end in the DVD market, specifically the international market. So it was like, whatever was going to perform well overseas is what, you know, you need an actor that would like draw. So there was like a list, and I think there still is like a secret book that only like so many people can see, that actually has like, it's almost like stock value of every actor, so that you know that Eric was going to, if a movie with Eric, if he has a gun in his hand, is going to do this kind of box office or DVD sort of sales. So there was a very short list of actors. I can't remember who the other ones were, but the other ones were definitely more like action stars. They weren't actors. And Eric was the only one who I like, you know, I remembered his performances in, you know, like The Pope of Greenwich Village and Star 80 and Raggedy Man and stuff like that. And I was like, this guy's a real actor, but he's been doing a lot of like low budget junk. Like maybe he can like pull it out. Like maybe he can remember, you know, and do it. And so that's how I approached him. I said, okay, well, if we have to pick off this, you know, menu, then it's going to be Eric. Yeah. And then I'll talk to him. And I think what it was, and we became good friends. You know, we spent a lot of time together in the years since we've made that movie. And I became good friends with his wife too, Eliza. But it was this weird thing where I felt like I had to impress upon him that this was not going to be just a dumb, by the numbers revenge thing, that it was like a character driven thing, and it required a performance, and that I was serious about this. And I think was sort of the beginning of him going, oh, maybe I should try, you know, in this one, you know, maybe I should really try to bring it, which he did, you know, which he totally did, you know. So that was like it was good for the movie, essential that he do that. Otherwise the whole thing would not have worked at all.
And that whole metaphor, La Cucaracha, and he's like a cockroach. You can't kill him.
He doesn't die throughout the movie.
Like how cockroaches can survive anything. It was kind of like
it's a big metaphor. Him as
he's like
he is La Cucaracha. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the namesake of the movie in a way. I mean, for sure. Just how he's like a cockroach. He comes back to settle the score.
And then he's living in like a shack when he comes in. That was a really cool touch.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Again, like another misfit. You know, again, it's somebody who's like, not unlike the Lloyd characters. Like he has an idea that he's going to be a novelist. I'm going to go to Mexico and I'm going to be like Graham Greene or Ernest Hemingway. But like the second he gets there, he's like mugged and he's robbed of all, and he's living in a shack, you know? So it's this idea that, yeah, this is going to be this romantic thing, and it turns out to be shit. And now what do I do with my life? And yeah, you're right. It's like, the character just keeps getting stomped on. And if there's any sort of glory to this character, is that he just manages to keep going, and that's sort of how that movie, you know, ends. It's just about the glory isn't just surviving, not necessarily winning anything or getting the girl. He doesn't get the girl, just like he doesn't get the girl in The Big Empty too. You know, it's the same. Yeah. It's the same sort of thing. So it's a similar, and I think it's interesting because again, that script came first, and then when we couldn't make that, we basically, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, now that you're breaking it down, The Big Empty is sort of just like a city-bound, less violent sort of version of the same story, of this sort of character kind of going through this whole thing. There's a lot of obsession, yes, right? And then just kind of winding up alone at the end like he was. And that's basically, both movies are like that, you know, in some way.
But they're also it was also a journey that helped them too. That was
a metamorphosis for the character.
That's right. They're slightly, that's true. And that's a very important point. Like they'll tell you in screenwriting class that the character has to be transformed by the end of the movie, otherwise it doesn't work. Unless you're looking at characters, say from 70s movies again, that might actually be identical to who they were at the beginning of the movie. I think the difference is that we kind of split the difference in that they're slightly more aware than they were at the beginning. You know, they have some sort of perspective, perhaps.
Yes.
You know, like, yeah, but they're not fundamentally different people. They're still got all their screwy traits and everything. They're just like, oh, I guess, yeah, okay, now I see what I was doing, maybe, you know, kind of thing. Which is probably mirrors my own awareness, because my own self-awareness is very low. You know, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, I probably haven't evolved that much. But yeah. But La Cucaracha, that when I made that film, it was the biggest budget. Yeah, that was the biggest budget that I had yet, which is not a lot, but it was certainly, you know, if America's Deadliest Home Video was, well, I mean, like Xena was like full-blown budget. So, but I don't even know what that budget was, because I was like, it's Universal money, you know. But in terms of movies, it was like, you know, America's Deadliest was like a $10,000 movie. The Big Empty was like a $150,000 movie, and La Cucaracha was like a $2 million movie. So even though those amounts of money are still small, kind of compared to what you know most movies have, it still was like, oh, this gets to be I can work on a slightly bigger canvas. I can do Mexico. I can make that work. You know.
You film it in Santiago?
No, the whole movie was shot in L.A. That's the thing. It's like my conception, and Santiago is a fictitious town actually, but the conception was that I was going to go shoot it in Mexico, because the films of Sam Peckinpah, as I've mentioned, particularly Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which was one of our favorite, Jim and my favorite films, was a big part of this sort of texture of this movie. But Peckinpah shot all his films in Mexico, and he uses the real environment and extras, and it just creates this real authentic thing. And what happened is the production company was like, oh, we shouldn't go to Mexico. It's too expensive. It's out of our control. It could be dangerous. You got to shoot it here. And I'm like, well, where? Like, where am I going to shoot it? And I realized that there were only two options. One, on the back lot of Universal Studios, there was like there's basically Old Mexico Street, which is part where the tram goes through, which has like a cathedral and a cantina. And then next door is kind of like where I don't know if you've ever been on the Universal Studios tour, but they have the flood. There's the flood street where the flood, like the water comes. And I was like, well, if we shoot this in a very creative way, we could kind of make this town, both of the towns that are in the movie, which is what we did. We ended up like taking over that part of Universal, and we brought in like truckloads of dirt to cover up all the asphalt where the trams go through, to make them like dirt roads. And then we started dressing in vintage cars and chickens and extras and everything. But it still ended up being ultimately it ended up being kind of a mythical Mexico, because the bones of that is like, it's like fantasy Mexico. Like I have a friend of ours who was Mexican, and she came to the set and she was like laughing, like, this isn't Mexico. This is like movie Mexico, right? And she was right, you know, because it was. But I started to kind of lean into that fantasy Mexico, or that's how it kind of like that's what became the look of that movie. But because again, they wouldn't let me go to Mexico, so the whole look of that movie changed. And then all of the desert, like where the shack is and where he's buried alive and all that stuff, is basically a abandoned reservoir in Chatsworth, which is just outside of LA. So I don't know if you've ever seen those reservoirs, you know, like where it's filled with water. When they go dry, it's just all this weird sort of desert sort of foliage crops up. So there was this huge, essentially gigantic sort of field-like thing that looked like desert, and that's where we shot that stuff. And then, which is why there's like when I do the shot where he's wakes up and he's buried alive, you'll see there's this weird sort of tower and stuff that's there, like this weird architecture, and that's just like the reservoir building, you know, whatever so it was just about using what we had to to kind of create that world, but it was all, you know, classic LA. Oh, and like, for example, the cave scene where he's there's a scene in the cave. Yeah, that's the classic. That's the Bronson Caves, which is the original Bat Cave from the 60s Batman series. But it's also been used in everything. So it doesn't matter whether it's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that's the end of the original, that's the cave there. It's the cave at the end of the Searchers. It's the cave in Robot Monster. It's the cave in Attack of the Crab Monsters. It's every like low budget thing you've ever, because it's a cave right in the middle of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's so like in the original script, there was that sort of interchange where he's like being hired was described as it was just a location that was a classic Mexican. I don't know what it was. It was like some weird butte or plateau or something. We had no location in LA that was going to match. So the guys that were looking for locations for us said, do you know about this Bronson Cave thing? And I already lived in LA for like 5 years, but I'd never heard of it. He said, yeah, it's the old Bat Cave. It's like 2 minutes from here. And so like I went up there and I was like, shit, this is like amazing. This is like, yeah, all right. So it's a cave. They have caves in Mexico, so it's a cave, So, a lot of this stuff is like taking advantage of what is in front of you, and seeing if it fits. If it does fit, you can actually, you can benefit.
It all came off as very authentic to us. So yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and all the interiors are sets. Like there's like the cantina set and the cantina and the schoolroom. Those are all built sets. I had this wonderful production designer, Reiko Kobayashi, who was my production designer on that movie, on La Cucaracha. I met her on that movie. She did Monster Island as well. And just a wonderful artist. And she's one of these people who can like take like nothing and build something beautiful. So we shot all the interiors at the studio in LA called Lacey Studios, which is mostly used for porno. Like it's mostly a porno like studio. And there was nothing pre-existing in the way of like a Mexican cantina or a church school. And she just built these things out of like nothing. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember my father-in-law, when he saw the movie, he goes, where's that bar? I want to go to that bar. And I'm like, it's not, it's the porno thing, it's a porno stage. It's not a real. So, I mean, it's a testament to Reiko's sort of production design skills that stuff plays.
I mean, the whole movie,
authentic.
It's such a cinematic atmosphere. That's a dry, sweaty movie. Eric Roberts gave just a very intense, very physical role for any actor to take on. I mean, he's crawling around half the movie, using a wheelchair in probably 100-degree weather.
It's buried,
he becomes a physically disabled person halfway through the movie and has to be okay with it. Like he's happy he's alive, and he realizes he can't walk. But it showed his range, and I just think that giving such a good role in such a gritty movie,
Oscar level performance, like
for sure,
definitely,
and not even that, he definitely Oscar worthy. But his character also was very quirky. Like there were quirks to his character. It wasn't surfacey. He had weirdness to him, and you don't have a lot of that with a lead character. You want him to come off as cool, but he's got these quirks to him. He's kind of a weird character. It's certain things he does, and we love the line about why is everybody so nuts. It's I mean,
that was actually that he improvised. That line he improvised. And to your point about, like, again, going back to this idea of like us favoring misfit characters or more eccentric, less normal characters. I mean, I think that was the thing that was just baked into Eric's personality that we lucked out in, and that he wasn't just kind of like this typical, good looking, normal guy, that he's kind of a freak in the best way, in the sense that he can't help it. That's who he is. So the fact that he was who he is, those things come out, and those help that character. Because I think originally, again, I was thinking of someone like William Hurt, like an intense actor, but essentially a internal character, like somebody who doesn't talk a lot, somebody who's like very sort of like feels everything, but is kind of like, shut down. And Eric is the opposite of that. Eric is very demonstrative, very, very sort of like, that's his personality. So he he brings that, and that I agree. I mean, I think it's definitely like one of his best performances. It's a really bold performance, and people who saw the movie, like like yourselves, usually point that out. They're like, yeah, wow, I didn't expect him to like give it, and he did. But I think it's because he also does stuff where he's like just kind of phoning it in, like he says like this is a job, and it's probably going to be a shitty movie, so I'm not gonna break my back. But I think on this one he definitely committed.
Yeah, like especially like he left his fiance because she sang along with the music. Like just things like
she sang along with the boring elevator music, like
that the quirkiness in that.
Because of that, he's like, I want to leave my office job and go to Mexico. Yeah,
and then
Right.
You have a very young Michael Pena in the film.
Michael Pena had like a pivotal role.
It looked like he was like 12, so I mean, I'm sure it's one of his
so young, yeah, super duper young. He was just starting, and my casting director on that movie, Monica Mickelson, who's an old friend, super cool person. It's like a really like a casting director is important in that, like, if you don't have an idea of somebody, or you don't have a name, or somebody you're going to be able to afford, you're looking to somebody like a casting director who has met a lot of actors and has really good taste, and says, well, I think this person you should see because this person's really good. And so in this case, it was kind of like, well, we have this orderly, he speaks Spanish only. He has to be like this interesting sort of empathetic character that helps Eric in this moment. Who we're going to get? And she said, oh, you got to see this Michael kid. He's great. And I said, bring him in, and so he auditioned, and I was like, great, he's awesome. So yeah, so it was like one of those deals where he, who knew that he would like blow up into this big star. But yeah, at the time he was kind of I remember him just being kind of nervous, just wanting to do well, kind of, like we all do.
You caught a lot of these superstar actors really early in their career. We notice that's another thing with you, is you find that you discover a lot of really you discover. I mean, Eric Roberts obviously very famous when he did this movie, but you also discover actors in a lot of your movies.
Yeah, Mary
Elizabeth Winstead. I mean, shit, right?
Yeah, in Monster Island.
Michael Pena. I mean, the list goes on.
Like, he's like a movie star. I remember we went to the theater and saw Chips when he was in that.
Right.
Like, school.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun movie.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Chips, because they were filming Chips. I shot this movie, which you probably didn't see, which you don't have to see, called Drone Wars, where we were shooting at this. There's a location. There's the weirdest location in LA. It's like, imagine an entire like neighborhood, like a gated community, like with like hundreds of houses and buildings, and there's a hospital there and everything, that's completely deserted. It's completely like something that you can shoot, all for shooting, but it's like houses and building. It's weird. And they were when I was shooting that movie, I was shooting in a hospital set there, and they were shooting Chips. So that was so weird, because it was like all this Chips stuff was like all over the, And anyway, but yeah, no, like Mary was like, again, like one of those, like I think we were having trouble casting that part. We weren't finding anybody. And I think because when we did Monster Island, we had to hire a certain number of Canadian actors because we were shooting in Canada, and that's how Ernst got involved in the movie. But I think there was a provision that if you couldn't find the right actor in Canada, you could go outside. So it was one of those things where we had auditioned every Canadian actress in the world to play that part, and it just wasn't working. And then finally we were like, all right, well, where else can we look? And then Mary sort of came into the equation, and then she ended up doing it. But yeah, pretty much everybody else in that movie is a Canadian actor, except for Carmen, and Adam West, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But anyway, yeah, no, La Cucaracha was like a really, I mean, it's a perfect example of really rewarding making a production experience, and then that kind of disappointing aftermath, in the sense that every time you make a movie, you kind of hope that there's a part of you that hopes that it's gonna like set the world on fire, that everybody's gonna see it, or that it's gonna be accepted or whatever. And we had good success with like La Cucaracha playing in, like, winning certain film festivals. It won at the AFI Film Festival and stuff. I mean, not the AFI, at the Austin Film Festival. but they kind of botched it had a small theatrical release that was sort of botched, where they didn't have the money to advertise, which is a big problem with theatrical, like having enough money to let people even know it's out there. And they fucked up, which is also very typical, the marketing. So like the company that released it wanted to cash in on the Eric Roberts with a gun sort of audience. And so the ads were these stupid, like, he's got a gun, and it just had nothing to do. Or they tried to release it in Spanish speaking theaters because of the title, which is slightly understandable, except it's not really a Spanish language movie. So it kind of just didn't get seen as much as I had hoped it would. Although, like I said, certain reviewers like Roger Ebert
loved the movie.
Was great about it. And that was a big deal for me, because it was like, again, like, you go back to things that, not that reviews should be like something that I mean, that's a big mistake. Like the second I forget who said it. Like, if you read good reviews, then you got to read bad reviews. And by the way, like, there's still a review. Like, there's a review of La Cucaracha, if you can find it. It was the last review, and I was like, I remember this so clearly, because Roger Ebert, who I loved as a kid, I used to watch sneak previews and at the movies. I was like, wow, this is like God has said my movie is good. I was like, my daddy loves me. I was like such a big deal. And then we got a great review in LA Weekly. This reporter the critic that I respected, loved the movie. I was like, this is amazing. And I remember saying to my wife at the time, if all, as long as the LA Times review is fine, we're great. And then the LA Times review came in by Kevin Thomas.
Yep.
And it was like somebody came up to me afterward and said, did you like kill his grandchildren or something? Like, what did you do to him? Because it's like this, it's almost like he didn't see the movie. It just starts with like, this is fucking horrible and everything is bad. Like, it's like there's nothing, it's like a massacre. I've never read it. I remember reading this thing and I was like, I can't believe he's this upset. Like, it didn't make any sense. And I remember I was in a diner in LA years later, and I was there and I looked over and he was there, and it's still like, it's still kind of like, you want to go over there and like, like, because what did I do to you? Like, what did I, how are you that upset? It doesn't even make any sense. So it's, that's why reviews are tricky, because all of us are like, want to be accepted. And so when somebody accepts you, is like, it pushes that button, but then we all know what it is to be absolutely rejected too, which is the worst. And then when that happens, you get hit with that shit. So I'm sure just even, putting your stuff on YouTube, you make yourself open to trolls and people who just want to talk shit. And so you kind of like, if you're going to, like, in a way, if you're going to embrace the good reviews, you sort of are leaving yourself open to be destroyed by the bad ones. And that's just part of it, I guess.
Put some back into reviews, and I've seen Kevin Thomas give some really good reviews to some questionable movies. So that's another funny thing about that. Yeah. I remember so especially around that time in the 90s.
A lot of reviewers are just getting paid to pick a movie apart and to point out what they don't like,
Yeah, and we do a lot of festivals too. I'm sure you obviously have done tons of festivals. Like the judging in a festival, like a lot of people who are judging festivals, they get appointed to be a judge in a festival, and then they think, well, I am the perfect person to criticize everything, when really a lot of times they think they just criticize things because they feel like they have to.
Like, it's like being a professor. Sometimes, like, you don't really necessarily think something's bad, but it's your job to tell them what they need to do.
That's right.
You got to make them. You got to make them better. But I think that makes sense. But I think, like, when it comes to the reviews and like judging at like a festival, I think a lot of people get caught up in ego.
Yes.
Like that, and like Kevin Thomas.
They're a critic; they have to be critical, right?
Yeah. Kevin Thomas was not in the California desert sweating his balls off filming an air.
Well, that's the thing too. It's like, I think it's so interesting. There's an old quote that I quote to my students sometimes, and you guys will appreciate this too, which is that somebody like sweat blood to make the worst movie you ever saw, right? And so it's very easy to be like an armchair quarterback and just go, well, this is what's wrong, and this is what's wrong with this, and this is what I think. I think ego does play a big part in it. It's also a power trip, I think, as a critic, to feel like you have this sort of almost like this godlike control over somebody's destiny. And if something rubs you the wrong way, you just have the ability to play with that. But also there is something also about the nature of criticism, where criticism is it is not making, like that's a very specific thing that's a very specific choice to that your mode of expression is really dissecting and in many ways destroying other people's work. You guys are different. You guys are filmmakers. So this is like a filmmaker on filmmaker conversation, which makes this different from like just like a film critic.
Yeah.
But someone who's purely a film critic and has never touched a camera, it's almost like that line in there's a line in The Natural. I don't know if you ever saw the film The Natural, but there's a line in The Natural where the Robert Duvall character is a baseball critic who like savages and fucks with people. And there's a moment where Redford's character, as this Roy Hobbs baseball player, turns to him and goes, "Did you ever play ball? Did you ever play baseball?" And he looks at him, Duvall looks at him and goes, "No, I can't say I have, but I think I think I make it more interesting for people to read about." And it is that sort of like, how can you really weigh in that heavily on something that you don't really understand? Is sort of what makes it interesting.
Nowadays with the internet, bad reviews will keep people from even seeing a movie. Like
which is
that's right, and that's deadly. I think that's one thing you have to like. That's why they're a powerful economic tool. But again, it's like if you're a discerning film goer, you should not be the kind of person that sees something based on, or not see something based on what a reviewer says, because it's all subjective, and to your point about like festivals and stuff, it's also agenda based, like what's somebody's agenda, and and so there's so many movies that have been critically panned that when I saw them, I'm like, this is like my favorite thing. Like I love this, and so it's entirely subjective. So it's stupid to be like, oh, I'm not going to go because so-and-so said it was thumbs down or whatever.
Sometimes when a movie gets torn apart, it just makes me more intrigued to go see it and enjoy it more.
I like to,
like I remember Batman versus Superman didn't get like a good response initially, but that just made me more intrigued
to see it. Yeah. I think in most cases it's like you want a reaction. Like an apathetic reaction is almost worse than a negative reaction. Like I remember like when Jim and I wrote our first screenplay and came to California, LA, to try to sell it, and met a lot of people and took a lot of meetings and didn't get anywhere. But no, we didn't get really many responses to the script, just kind of standard, like, thanks for your submission, it's not for us. But we were staying in a hotel in LA for like a couple of weeks. We hadn't moved there yet, and we got a phone call through the hotel in our room, and it was this one of the executives that we had met with had pitched the script. Now this was a horror film that was really designed to like disturb the shit out of you. So the way it was built was it was almost like the first half of it was like a Disney movie, and then it turned into Last House on the Left, like it just became, so it kind of set you up for this thing that was like very like almost like gentle and loving, and then just turned on a dime and became like sick. And that was how it was built. We thought that was interesting. So nobody liked it. This woman calls us up and starts screaming into the phone, like, I can't fucking believe you had the balls to give me this piece of filth. This is disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should be fucking ashamed. And she hung up on us. And Jim and I looked at each other and we were like, like, awesome. Yes. Because it's like, at least it was like a response. It was like, okay, you're really angry. That's great. That's so much better than, whatever. You know what I mean? Okay. So it was kind of like we were, even though it was a definite no, we were actually thrilled that somebody like,
hey man, that's
like it messed with them. Okay, good. That was what we were trying to do. So
so do you have like a favorite, any other La Cucaracha stuff? Jim's performance, like you couldn't even tell it was the same guy from The Big Empty. Like he was just a totally different person. It was really a really good nuanced performance on his part too.
And how was it collaborating with Eric Robertson, kind of getting this performance out of him in a way? Because like you said, sometimes he would do things for the paycheck, I'm sure.
Yes.
Definitely a different thing at that time. Like, what was it like? Was he like, oh, I don't want to crawl through the dirt? I mean, like,
well, it's interesting that you bring that up. There were two things that sort of were interesting. I mean, overall, the experience was great. And he was like enormously collaborative and totally saw what we were trying to do and did everything I asked of him. And a lot of fun, like really, really funny guy. And we just got along. In the beginning, though, when I first met him, actually, I hadn't met him personally. He called me up after he took the job, and he said, "I have an idea of how I'm going to play this Walter character." And I said, "Oh, what's the idea?" And he said, "I'm going to do it with a New Jersey accent. I'm going to talk like this the whole time. I'm going to talk with a New Jersey accent. He says he's from New Jersey, so New Jersey people talk like this. I'm going to talk like this the whole movie." And I was like, that's, I was like, that's terrible. Like, I didn't say that, but I was like, oh my God, this if he does that, this is going to be such an affected performance. It's just not going to work. It's going to be terrible. But what do I do? It was the first conversation with him. So I had to be like careful how I handled this thing. So I said, well, that's an interesting idea, Eric. I don't know if it's necessary, though. I said, I think your voice, your normal speaking voice, and I know plenty of people from New Jersey who don't talk like. So I said that, and he said, I could tell he was like, he didn't like that. So he was kind of like, he said, "Why don't you come over to the house and we'll talk about it?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck." All right. So I said, "All right." So he lived in the San Fernando Valley. He lived in Sherman Oaks, which was close to me. I said, "All right, I'll be over there, and I can come now. I'll be over there in 20 minutes." So I drove over there, and I met his lovely wife, Eliza, and he brought me into his living room. We sat down, and he says, he was kind of like, "So you don't like the accent?" And I'm saying, "No, it's not that I don't like the accent. I just think that it's absolutely, I don't think it necessarily brings anything extra. I think it'd be better if you just did it yourself. I think you have your natural speaking voice." I was complimenting him, saying, "The way we don't need the accent." And he was kind of like, so then we talked about some other stuff, and I said, "Look, but I defer to you. I'm perfectly willing to try anything. Like I said, I'm not And we shook hands, and I left, and I kind of was driving home, going, "This whole movie is fucked because he's going to do this accent, and it's going to suck, and I can't stop it." And when the second I got home, the phone rang, and it was Eric. And he said, "Hey, it's Eric." I said, "Oh, hey, man, what's happening?" He goes, "I'm not going to do the accent." And I said, and I was kind of thrown by it, and I was sort of relieved. I was like, "Oh," I said, "Really? Why? Why don't you want to do the accent?" He's like, I don't want to do it. I'll forget the accent." Right? And I said, "Okay," but I was still being political. I was like, "But I'm willing to try it. You want to test it?" And like, "No, we're not doing it." So then, so they hang up the phone, and I was like, "Fucking awesome! All right, great. He's not going to do the stupid accent." Later, while we were making the movie, it was like 2 weeks into the movie. I was hanging out between takes with his wife, who was there on the set. And I don't know if you know Eliza. She's actually was an actress herself. She's in Schlock. She's in John Landis's Schlock. She's the woman in Schlock. She's in Animal House. She's Brunella at the desk when they go in and they try to get their dates. And Tim Matheson is all like, trying to find the date that died in the kiln accident or whatever. So I said, "I'm curious. Did you know that Eric wanted?" I said, talking to her, I said, "Did you know that he wanted to do an accent?" And she goes, "Oh my God, do I know?" I said, "What happened?" He goes, "Well, when you left that day, he came upstairs and started complaining about this new director he's working with." He goes, "This little pissant kid, he thinks he knows about acting, and he doesn't want me to do the accent that I have in mind." And Eliza asked her husband, "What accent are you thinking of?" And he goes, "I'm going to talk like this, like I'm from New Jersey." And she looked at him and she said, "Don't do the accent."
That's funny. Yeah, I saw them on an episode of Wife Swap. So yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, and he was like, "Oh, okay, I guess it sucks. All right, so then I'm not going to do it." And so it was like, so she saved it because she basically told him that's a bad idea, and he was like, "Oh, listen to my wife. Forget it. It's a bad idea."
And I'm sure. Yeah, and like being the young director you were at the time, you didn't want to step on anybody's toes or anything like that.
Yeah,
you didn't want to like tip your hand at all, because I'm sure you felt really lucky to be given the opportunity. I mean,
absolutely. And he was like an Oscar nominated actor, and not that the Academy Awards mean anything, but he was like, he had way more, like, he had more, he just had more weight in that department. And here I am, like, and but again, it's like, I think that if you're a director of if you have any skill at all, you have to be decisive. You have to be like, this, whether it's right or wrong, whether this is the right decision for you or the wrong decision for you. And I think ultimately I probably would have put my foot down, but you're right. In that moment, he was like the first sort of like, outside of Xena and stuff, it was like the first like movie star I was directing. and it was tricky. I had to be really kind of careful how I played it. But again, fortunately, Eliza sort of came in and helped save the day, because it was like a lot of actors are like that. Like I've been with Eric on other, because I've hung out with him just on other movies. Like I hung out with him on the set of The Expendables in New Orleans, just hanging out and getting high, staying in his place, and he would tell me about, oh, I'm going to do this movie next, and he's like, I'm going to play it with these crazy teeth. Actors love like these like gimmicks, like, hey, I'm going to play the whole thing with these crazy teeth. I'm like, really? I don't know what it is. It's an actor thing.
Right. Here we are again. Thank you, Zoom.
Yeah, right. It's funny. I was just upstairs. My wife was like, did you tell him the story about how Eric almost killed Jim at the airport? I'm like, no, I haven't gotten to that yet.
Yeah. Let's hear it. Yeah. Let's hear it.
I mean, there are all these things. There was a time where we were playing, the Cucaracha was playing film festivals before it was released. There's my cat, Bip. You want to come here?
Oh,
Tip, you want to? We have 5 cats, by the way.
Wow, nice.
We've always been cat people. We love dogs too, but we've never been able to mix them. But we have 5 crazy cats. So let's see what are you doing? Anyway, so we were playing a festival in New York, and Eric was attending the festival. So Jim, Eric, and I flew from LA to New York.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think, it was funny. Eric, Jim's character, Jim's personality at times is difficult for some people. And he's a very, like the reason Jim can play those kind of characters like Lloyd in Big Empty, and the Lewis character in The Cucaracha, is that he does have this sort of like, he's crazy. I mean, he's crazy, and it can drive people crazy. And at some point, Eric and Jim just started to like, something was happening where they were just like not getting along. And it actually culminated in, when we flew back together to LA, and we landed at LAX, and it was like really late. So everyone's super tired. And we're waiting for the luggage to come off. And all of a sudden I start to hear the two of them just like, yeah, you want to go outside? And I turn around, and like Eric and Jim have got each other like, like this, by like in baggage claim, like all these people are looking at Eric, and Eric was still, he's still, at that point, it's like best of the best. Like there's no way, Jim is just going to be cream, but I know you're like, you're going to fight Eric Roberts like crazy, Eric's like, yeah, I'm going to take you out, like that kind of stuff. And I have to like get in there, and separate them. Yeah, Jim is incited. I mean, I've had many instances where, I've been driven to the point of like, I remember when we were writing The Big Empty. I've never done this before. It's kind of like a classic writer's thing, where sometimes it helps if you just go away somewhere where there's no distractions.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you just write, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, my sister's boyfriend her parents had a cabin or something in Big Bear, which is it's outside of LA. Yeah. And they said, you can go up there for like a week and just write. So we went up there to like finish the script for The Big Empty. And but Jim is like a night owl, so it's like he sleeps during the day and wants to write at night,
creative at night.
And and that's not unusual, but it was just like, but I'm not on that schedule. So it was the kind of thing where I was like going insane because I can't sleep during the day, and then I ended up being up 24 hours. And at a certain point, we were driving together around Big Bear, and he was driving me crazy. I literally opened the car door. I was in the passenger seat and just jumped out of the car. What? Like I literally jumped out of like a moving vehicle I had. So in a way, I can understand why Eric like lost his shit and almost killed him.
Oh yeah.
But you guys know how that is.
Yeah, sure. And brothers, and then we have
everybody has like that guy who's kind of like Jim, I think, Like,
yes,
yeah,
you're
sometimes like kind of
you're endeared to them, but at the same time,
sometimes like that whole thing works for your creative process too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, absolutely. It, for the most part, it worked, and then at a certain point, it just became so difficult. And that was one of the sort of the sad things, is that it was just like we almost made another movie with Eric, a Western, actually, like a full blown Western, that didn't happen. And then Jim really wanted to concentrate on acting. He really didn't want to write anymore. And that was kind of a problem because we had kind of started our careers more or less together as this writer-director team. And that's like going back to the Stephen King thing. That was when I was really like all of a sudden like, well, wait a minute, now I've lost my writer. Now I've got to go back to writing my own material. And that's when that book I said, okay, now I've got to kind of go back to like America's Deadliest when I was like doing my own thing.
Yeah.
So, but Jim, did act in a few pieces. I think the thing that's most notable is if you've ever seen Black Dynamite,
yes,
which was made by
Black
Dynamite. Jim plays Nixon.
Yeah, and Michael J. White, Spawn. Yeah. We
stayed at our high school buddy's house a year or so ago, and we just all had some beers, just watched that movie. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Scott Sanders is an old friend, so like who did Black Dynamite. So like in my DP, Sean Maurer, who shot Luku at the Big Empty, he shot Some Guy Who Kills People, and he also shot The Brady Bunch for me.
Yes.
He shot Black Dynamite. So there was like it's a whole group of us that sort of trade, that work together, that kind of work together.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's such a good movie.
Where did you get your? You said you went to film school. Where'd you go?
I went to NYU, but truthfully, like I've taught, like right now I'm teaching at Portland Community College, and which I think has good. It's weird because colleges are like film festivals, like ooh NYU or ooh USC, and I was like, I think I've taught everywhere, and what I've learned, and I even taught at USC, even though I didn't get in. Like I applied to USC as a student and didn't get in. I ended up teaching there, and when I finally taught there, I was like, this is no big deal. This is like no different from the New York Film Academy or any. It's like it's no different. What's important in film school is really the kind of teachers that you have, and also the kind of work that you do. Like film school is good for being exposed to a lot of cinema maybe that you didn't know about, and for constantly making stuff so that you can refine your skills, and that's what it's good for. And if you're lucky enough to have a teacher who sort of says something that opens your eyes about something, then that's what it's, and everything else doesn't matter, so
and that's a lot of people.
That's my thing.
And I know a lot of people in the production world, they're always like, oh, film school, but I'm like, look guys, I understand that like you get a new camera every year, and so everybody has to learn that, and the equipment changes, things change, things on set change, but
the core things,
is they're teaching you how to tell a story, how to structure a story. And
that's
there's very few people that can do that in the filmmaking industry.
They get too caught up in the technical side.
That's right. That's absolutely right. I do think as a teacher myself, my whole thing, because when I went to NYU, even though it was a good school and I got a lot out of it, they teach you how to make a movie, but not necessarily the whys behind certain choices that you're going to be making. And what I've always tried to do is sort of in my own teaching is kind of take the technical and the sort of the emotional, like make that connection so that you understand that when you do a close-up or you move the camera, that there is a particular corresponding emotional reasoning, behind. It's not just like you get a close-up because you're supposed to get a close-up. Yes. So it's like, for example, one of the things that came out, like I had one teacher, Lamar Sanders, who was primarily a writer, had done some professional writing, but was mostly a teacher, and I think he's still teaching at NYU. Nice. But I remember once I was struggling with how to shoot something, like how, because there's a million different ways to shoot anything. Like no matter what the scene is, you can attack it visually. Static cameras or moving cameras, or is it overhead or is it below, or like is it in close-ups or is it all like what governs how you decide to shoot something? And one of the things he told me that was like a huge eye-opener for me. He said, well, whose story is it, like through whose eyes do you want to see this story? Like who's your most important character? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you can look at a scene objectively, meaning you can kind of like observe the action, or you can witness the events in the script through the eyes of a particular character. And obviously all you have to do is look at any Hitchcock movie and you realize that most of the scenes are designed subjectively. It's always how a person is looking at something, and that's different from sort of traditional coverage. And that idea of sort of stepping visually into a character and shooting it that way is something that just, for me, just like was like, oh, that's okay, that makes sense. That's a philosophy that I can sort of apply. And so you'll see that a lot of the movies, particularly where your main character, where you have like one strong main character, like The Big Empty or The Cucaracha, or even some guy who kills people, that most of it is subjective. Like you're basically with this character and you're kind of experiencing these events through this person's perspective. And so I've taken like that one thing that was introduced in a class, in 1985 or something, and to this day is still something that I use. So I think it's like, and I told him that too. I remember one time I ran into him years later. I invited him to a screening because I wanted his approbation. I wanted my teacher to tell me I did good. And I remember telling him, I said, hey, by the way, Lamar, I remember you said this thing in class once that like totally opened my eyes. And it was so funny. He goes, really? Did I say that? I'm like, yeah. You said. So I think it all boils. I think the institution is less important than the teacher.
Oh yeah. For sure. That's I definitely can agree with that one.
Yeah.
Did Robert Burke go to NYU when you went there? He's one of our favorite actors. I think he went there. I don't know. Because I think
Robert Burke, I don't know if he was there when it was weird. When I was in NYU, it was, it's so interesting you bring that up, because there were a lot of children of celebrities that were at NYU. Like Roman Coppola was in our class, and Jesse Dillon, Bob Dylan's son.
Bob Dylan, American Wedding, and all.
Who created Breaking Bad was in our class. Why am I blanking on his name? I can't remember. Vince Gilligan was in our class. And Adam Sandler was in our class. And we shot like some of our. It was so funny because like one of my friends, Scott Popchez, he shot a short film for class assignment called. This is when when Raiders of the Lost Ark was coming out, the original. And he did a thing called like a play on that. He called it Indiana Nerd or something. And it was a geek who puts on a fedora and he becomes like, and he beats up the bully because he's empowered by the magical fedora. And the bully is played by Adam Sandler. And it's just it's the school project. So there were a lot of those people sort of floating around oddly. I think Kathy Scorsese was there too. Wow. But it was an interesting time. I think film school is good too, because if you there are certain people, like certain actors or certain technicians that you'll work with, and again, like Jim, I met at NYU. So that was like the work that came out later was a direct result of those meetings. So I think if nothing else, also film school is good just for meeting people that you're potentially going to work with down the road.
Yeah, making connections. Yeah.
I know how our film school is. Like I think Craig Brewer came from ours, Hustle and Flow, and then
Footloose.
Footloose. He did, he's obviously a great director. And then Jay Russell.
He did Coming to America. Yeah, the sequel. Yeah.
And then you got Jay Russell, who did like Ladder 49 and My Dog Skip and Tuck Everlasting. So there's been a few. Right. There's been a few, but like not to the level of like obviously NYU. But it's always funny because when I work on set, we do freelance production work. We end up working with Michael Shannon last year and like Jessica Chastain because they came to Nashville to do Georgia.
Cool.
But like our professors, like they're all like retired and they want to like blow the photos up and put them on the wall in the communications department. And we're like,
of course.
I mean, it's just funny because it's just funny how like you carry on with these people and they don't. Film professors aren't necessarily patting you on the back a lot.
Oh yeah,
in school they're telling you everything you're doing wrong and stuff.
Well, there's always one kid they're patting on the back, but never you. Yeah.
That's unfortunate. Like I really do feel like like my job as a teacher is to come to the student wherever they're coming from. Like because I feel the same way. It's like I didn't feel like at school I was necessarily singled out and like told I was great. I just the opposite. And they were always like pets. Like there's always some student that the teachers were just falling over that of course later didn't end up doing anything. But there's politics in school like that sucks.
Yeah. And
as a teacher, I feel like I'm always kind of aware of where I was as a student, or at least I try to be. So if somebody comes to me with like a crazy idea, like some weird idea, my job as a teacher is not to say, well, that's too weird, you should make it like this. My thing should be like, okay, well, let me try to see more clearly what you're trying to do, and if I can help you make that somehow stronger, then that's my job, as opposed to judging. Because teachers don't, I mean, look, I mean, it's like film festivals or critics. Like, teachers don't necessarily know shit. They know what they know. But the problem is that a teacher is in a position to evangelize as if what they are saying is the word of God. And that's empowering. And again, like a critic, it's ego boosting and all these things. But it's also like can be abused, because even in schools that I've taught, I remember somebody took over the school as head of the whole school. And she was like a crazy person who was like saying that, like, almost like Trumpian, like, this is the way the world works, and this is how you direct a movie. And I was like, I don't subscribe to that. And I'm perfectly willing to say that this is a way of directing, but I can't say this is the only way. And this person was saying, no, you have to say this is the only way it's done. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. That's a lie. That's just you being crazy and like maniacal, like dictatorial, like saying this is how it's done. It's like, well, everybody does it differently. Everybody directs actors differently. Everybody shoots differently. So you can't say this is the only. So if you're lucky enough to get somebody who's at least open, if not encouraging, then you're one of the lucky ones. That you could wind up with a maniac who just like not only tears your shit apart but teaches you incorrectly, which is dangerous.
I'm glad we were able to discuss this part of stuff in the doc in this.
It's interesting hearing
this interview, because
from a teacher and a director's
and then
perspective.
You're somebody who's been through the same sort of like film school system as us, and you understand the politics of that, and then you become a professor, after obviously being so successful in Hollywood and stuff, and still doing your Hollywood
and you
thing.
Avoid those things that you saw.
I think that shows a lot of a very humbling story to hear how you approach it completely differently, because you understand more about it from not sort of an outsider looking in perspective, like someone who was there and it was going through it, and I think that served you well in your career. And
thanks. Well, I hope so. It's one of those things where I guess it's like anything. It's like even when I make a movie now, there's always a period of time, particularly usually on the very first day. My wife says she gets a phone call usually at lunch on the first day of whenever I make a movie, and it's the same phone call, and it's basically I'll call up at lunch and I'll say, I'm fucking this up. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm screwing this up or something, and she'll laugh and say, you do this every time, and that sort of insecurity, which I think comes out in films like, again, we talked about like Hearts of Darkness, where you see like Coppola, having done both Godfathers, is still like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm ruining this. I think that's more authentic. Like if somebody thinks that they're the greatest thing and so super talented, that's usually camouflaging a deep insecurity. Oh, yeah. And so like, teaching is the same way. I'm always I just started a summer semester at this new school here in Portland. And I was like so nervous about like, even though I've been teaching for 12 years, I was so nervous about like, am I gonna like, I don't want to like embarrass myself in front of these. I want it to be good. And I'm constantly surprised. Like there's a student in my class now who like barely talks, admittedly like came forward ultimately and said, I am autistic, which I understand because I am autistic too. I've just learned how to mask really well. I needed to learn how to mask really well in my career. But she was like, just one of the students that was just disappearing into the woodwork, like wasn't saying anything, didn't seem to be participating or even interested. And I kind of made a mistake. I was like, wow, I assumed that this student was not really going to do very much in this class. And then a couple of days ago, she came forward to pitch this idea, because we were pitching like ideas for shorts that we were going to do in the class. And she pitched this idea, and she got up there and she was like terrified because she like didn't want to speak publicly, and she barely talked anyway. And she was like reading off her phone, and she starts pitching this idea, this amazing fucking idea. And not only was like a great idea, but it was like so thought out, and it was like so intricate, and it was so interesting. And I was just like, whoa, like, fuck, that's like, and so here I was like a minute ago going, well, I probably can write this student off. She's not gonna, and then next thing I'm doing, I'm like, this is the greatest thing. You got to write this, because I was genuinely like excited. Like I I want to be the teacher that I would have liked to have had,
Yes.
when I was a student. I think that's sort of the approach, is like, can I do that? And I remember Scorsese talking about that too, because he said that when he was at NYU, he had the guy that ran the film school there was an old Navy cameraman named Haig Manoogian. This is when film schools were brand new. Like, this is the early 60s, when film schools like didn't even exist. So they had some Navy camera guy teaching these students. And he said something very interesting. Scorsese said he wasn't the kind of teacher that taught you how to make movies, but he was definitely the kind of teacher that got you so excited about making movies, because his love for movie making was so intense that it was just kind of like, it was like communicate, it was like contagious. So he didn't necessarily show you like, this is how you do it, but he kind of gave you the inspiration to just go out there and try to do something. And I thought that was like, magical. That's like what you want. Like, you want somebody, you don't want the guy to come up there going, okay, today we're gonna, like, that's like the worst kind of teacher you can have. You want someone to be like spiritual, almost
inspired,
Yeah.
Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society. Yeah.
Right.
So
right. Totally.
You worked with the redhead guy who ratted him out in Dead Poet Society.
That's right. He's the lawyer. He's the lawyer in Wealth. It's funny you recognize him. And by this point, I was sort of like but it's so funny because for some reason, maybe I'm the only person who saw this, but other people are like, when they saw it, they're like, he seems kind of young to be a lawyer.
He looked like he was
he's like a kid lawyer. But I liked him in Dead Poets, and he was the strongest one who auditioned. So I was like, okay, cool, let's put him in as the why not?
I love how you fill your movies out with actors that like we just freaking love,
and you use a lot of the same people. Like, going back to that, that was really cool.
Yeah,
and,
you do.
And this last few minutes, it's been cool hearing your teaching process and how you approached it and how you just refined it. That's really cool. Yeah.
How about we end today on the Mary Kayla unauthorized things?
Oh, okay.
Pretty much. I say we start with Brady Bunch.
We're going to the 2000s now.
Yes, we're going into the 2000s. We're leaving the 90s behind.
It's fun doing this comprehensive, like, kind of.
Wow, it's like really like amazing the detail with which you approach this.
Yeah, and we remember these coming out because I remember right before the Brady Bunch came out.
Right before you did this, they did this
weird thing,
this documentary on Fox on behind the scenes of the Brady Bunch,
and it was like interviewing the actors and stuff from the show.
Oh, right.
Maureen McCormick's face was blurred out the whole time,
and I'm assuming that like had good ratings, so they're like, let's jump into this.
It might be why they did this one you did. Yeah. And I remember being in second grade watching that, and then I guess it was a year or so later this came out.
Yeah, and then
so did Fox come to you and they're like,
what was it like? Were they like, how did that get started?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The company that I worked for, that I did the behind the scenes and the Walker Texas Ranger making of and all that, they were also doing it was kind of a natural extension, and they had done Hearts of Darkness, right? So they were doing, kind of documentary work, and that led to a relationship in reality television, doing series like Temptation Island, which I directed anonymously.
I remember sitting in my dad's bed watching that.
And but I don't know if you knew that, because I did those.
It wasn't on your IMDb, but I saw it on your Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's not, because I couldn't use my real name, so I think technically I'm down as like a consulting producer, but basically I directed the first 2 seasons of Temptation Island. But anyway,
we used to watch that.
That was right after Survivor, and the reality boom was happening.
Right. It was really new, and that's a whole other discussion. We can talk about that too, because that was the beginning really of reality television.
Yeah, the Brady Bunch thing.
But because of the relationship that company had with Fox, Fox started toying with this idea of like ripped from the headlines, because Fox was doing a lot of sensational stuff at the time. I did another show for them through the same company called Close Calls, Cheating Death, which was like a totally exploitative like collection of like disasters caught on tape, and then you interviewed the people who survived.
They had the FX network. They used to play that in reruns.
So like I had Robert Urich doing the the narration. That was fun. So anyway, that relationship with Fox existed, so that when they were playing around with this idea of doing riff from the headlines, sort of made for television movies, they had a relationship with that company. And so they came to me because I was one of that company where we were making behind the scenes. It was all directors, but we were doing, so like people who were there were like Peyton Reed was there with us. Peyton does all the Ant-Man movies. John Schultz was there. He was doing he ended up doing Drive Me Crazy, and Right. And oh yeah, Judy. And by the way, if you look at the back of that, you'll see Sean Maurer, I think, shot that too.
And I think Jim had a role in it. Yeah. I was a huge Heather Graham fan growing up, so I remember we went to see that just because she was in it. I have a
right.
Heather Graham on the wall, actually.
So all of these guys together, Sean used to shoot the behind the scenes documentaries with. So there's a whole group of people, editors like John Pace, who cut La Cucaracha. He was like cutting my behind. So everybody was like sort of together in this like company.
Yeah.
And so because there were directors there, they were like, well, we have directors here who can do these sort of rip from the headlines.
Yeah.
MOW. So they threw out a couple. There was one on different stroke on what's her name on Different Strokes, or Dana Plato. That was it on Different Strokes. I think there was a Different Strokes movie that I didn't do. Another director did.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, "What about the Brady Bunch?" And I was like, and I was a huge Brady Bunch fan. You know, I was like, I mean, I grew up watching the Brady Bunch, so I was like,
oh yeah,
I'm in. I want to do this.
Yeah.
And what I liked best about it was that it was twofold. It was like we could concentrate on the making of the show, but we could also shine a light on all this sort of behind the scenes darkness that was going on.
Yes.
And so that was sort of the cool thing, was that I could kind of play in this world that I loved watching and recreate. And so I had, again, my production designer, Reiko Kobayashi, came on, and we didn't have the budget to create, like we didn't have the budget to do the whole like living room with the stairs and everything, but we kind of pinpointed what we could build. Like we could build, we could do the kitchen, you know, we could do the backyard, we could do the room off the kitchen, the wood panel, and we could do the kids' rooms, you know. So we had that kind of, we made that choice, and that was really super fun to do. Like I used to come to set or super early just so I could eat breakfast alone in the kitchen, you know, just because I wanted to be in the Brady Bunch kitchen, right? So that was super cool. And also what was great about it is that they, even though it was a network movie or whatever, they just left me alone. So Sean and I went pretty extreme and for a TV movie about how dark we were going to kind of do those scenes, you know, like the behind the scenes stuff. We went dark, whereas I think there was a competing Brady Bunch movie that Barry Williams actually produced. That was a much more sort of like sugar coated, and
that was actually made by Paramount, the studio that
made the show. So it was like a less, you know, Fox was definitely scandal driven. So but that was like, I had a lot of fun because I did a lot of like funky stuff on that movie that I hadn't done before. Yeah,
we love about and it all was taking place in the last week of the show, but you kind of you kind of condensed like a lot of the behind the scenes stuff into the last week.
Him dating Florence Henderson, Barry Williams dating, things like that. But also what we love is Robert Curtis Brown's one of our favorite characters.
Oh, he's wonderful, isn't he? I love him. Yeah,
great job.
That movie showcased his range because he always plays kind of like hokey, like, you know, surface roles.
The uncle, the dad,
But this role, man, it just showed his range. And what you did with Robert Reed is that anytime they would talk about Robert Reed being gay, it'd be kind of like a punchline. It'd be like, oh, do you know the dad on Brady Bunch was actually gay? Let's make fun of that. Anytime they talk about it on TV, it was like they were kind of making a fun of it in a way. But you represented his story in a tender way.
You showed the humanity behind Robert Reed in that special.
And here you are showing him pick up a guy at a bar, you know. And then the next day they're in the hotel room, but you're not sensationalizing that in any way. You're not exploiting it. You're just showing
it as it was.
And even in the early 2000s, that wasn't something you were seeing a lot on TV because you get. I mean, some shows would get canceled for having a gay scene. Just
true. That's absolutely true. And I guess it's like we kind of got away with. Thank you. We kind of got away with that too, because again, it goes back to like someone like Fox. I mean, you know, a Fox executive is going to be like, make sure the gay thing is in there, right? And it's precisely to your point, like usually not from an empathetic or sympathetic perspective. It's just like, get that gay shit in there because that's the good shit.
The salacious.
And that's the salacious stuff, right? So in another director's hands, and not to say one's better than the other, but somebody else might be more interested in either exploiting that or condemning that or whatever. And I think that obviously my own political leanings are certainly, you know, not conservative.
Yes,
so I'm not inclined to judge anything, but I do think that it's much better anyway, regardless, to present something rather than judge it. You know what I mean? If you present it, then it's bound to be feel more real, I think. And it really was the goal. It's like,
yeah,
if if we're supposed to show his life as a homosexual man, then let's just show it, and as opposed to like judge it or exploit it, right? And in many ways, that's how I know we're not talking about it, but in many ways, that's sort of how I approached even the Mary Kay Letourneau thing, which is even in many ways even more scandalous, especially in today's day and age. This whole idea of a teacher, having sex with an underage minor, and I tried very hard to just show that too. Even though I don't necessarily condone that, it was more interesting to just kind of, again, like, to almost show it from her perspective.
That's what I'm saying. You really, if anybody ever saw interviews with her, she really wasn't, I hate to say it, but she really wasn't like all there in a way, especially as she got older.
Right.
Like the first thing she said is, "Oh, I didn't know what I was doing was wrong." But
what you did with her showed that manic little like
like you said, you show things through the character's perspective. Yeah, and that's like one of the things you like to do. You really did that.
This little dream she thought she was living, and how she was a little disillusioned, and obviously mentally ill, obviously, unfortunately, but like yours really showed that side of it. How like, okay, you're watching, you're like, wow, now we get because everything else was so surface. Okay, woman's having sex with a student, they fall in love, but this was your inner mind, and you're really pinpointing what this woman's going through in her mind,
and what she was thinking.
And
I'm glad you recognize that. Well, I mean, it's like, again, it's like, filmmaking, it's not like I roll out of bed and get to make a film. It's like, in many ways, I've always said that each movie I make is coming 5 years later than when I was ready to make it. So oftentimes there's like years between making a film. And so each time, no matter what it is, whether it's a Wild Things 2 or whether it's a Mary Kay thing, it's like, even if these are things that I didn't build from the ground up, it's like an opportunity to like make something, and it's an opportunity to express yourself, even if it's not. So like, what I try to do is look upon each opportunity, even though maybe the intentions of the producers or the studio are strictly just like, let's exploit the hell out of this. I just say, well, look, this is a rare opportunity for me to do something that interests me, maybe. So can I get in there and show it or design it in a way that is interesting, at least to me? So I try, I guess in some cases, I try to make more. I mean, I've said this a couple of times, not on movies like that, but like there have been a couple of times where like on like a really painful low budget like genre movie like The Child or Drone Wars or something like that, where it's just like so low budget and they don't give a shit and they're not letting me cast any, it's almost like doomed from the start. And I'll still even try again, like, sweating blood on the worst movie ever made. I'll still try, and at a certain point I'll probably look at my DP or something and go, these people don't deserve this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm almost like working like there are some things that are made that are just, they don't care if it's any good, and I'm always just trying to make the best thing I can possibly make, regardless of how little or how stupid the idea is. That's my, I think it's selfish too. It's not like I'm some like, oh, I'm doing it because I'm like this. That's what it means to be a filmmaker. I'm doing it because like it's so rare that if you come to the plate, you might as well try to swing for the fences each time, because what's the point? What's the point?
Like you said, Fox gave you a lot of leeway on these to
definitely
present the story through your unique lens. And
got to show all these behind the scenes things, like with each character, what they were kind of going through. And you had like an hour to do it, and you covered a lot, and like condensing it to a week was a way to put all that stuff in one period of time, which really helped it.
And I know Peter Brady worked with you on Wild Things too. So
yes, he's a good actor.
And it was really funny because the guy who played Barry Williams,
we're like, how do we know this?
We're like, how do we know this mofo? And then like we look it up,
and it was like a Disney Channel. I recognize his face from the Disney Channel.
And then there was this show on Disney Channel called Z Games that he hosted, where he was like,
where these kids make up these games and they show them playing these games they've made up.
Oh, really? How funny.
So it's made up games, like, games you make up in the street with your buddies.
So
like,
when he was on digital, they went to IMDb and we're like, he was the host of Z Games. That's
the first season of Z Games, he was a skinny nerd.
That's so funny. You're talking about Greg, the guy who played Greg, right?
Yeah, Greg Sif.
Yeah, Greg Sif. I mean, because Greg is like, I think fundamentally now an artist. You know, if you look him up, he's like a fine artist. I mean, that's his like thing. So it's interesting, yeah. But I guess we kind of have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, let's do it till it runs out here. So but yeah, the Brady Bunch was a real pleasurable experience for a lot of those reasons, because of the freedom creatively, because of the subject matter.
Yeah. And the tenderness. Sorry to interrupt. I don't want to interrupt, but like the tenderness.
Literally a family, and you saw the love they had for each other as a family after 5 or 6 years.
The heartbreaking nature of him being written out in the last episode. And he still shows up. He's on set.
To be there on set and be with his family. That was.
And he gave up his life, for that show.
I didn't even remember that he wasn't in the last episode. Like I was, but he was there. It was really powerful.
But like and I know a lot of the comments on YouTube about it. I mean, those things are really blown up on YouTube. Mary Kay Letourneau
on your video, you posted it, and a lot of people were really grateful that
Mary Kay Letourneau, when he's got like
this Brady Bunch thing, and they got to see it again.
3 million views on your Mary Kay Letourneau.
The Mary Kay Letourneau.
Really? I had no idea. That's so weird. I had no idea.
3 million views. Yeah.
And it's
just, it's interesting about the Mary Kay Letourneau. You know, you probably know this. That movie, that was another sort of it wasn't like the heartbreak of my life, but it was still heartbreaking because Fox decided not to air that movie. What? Like what happened was we shot the whole movie, we finished it. They signed off on it. They said great. They were going to air it, and then they didn't air it. And it was kind of like, and then the kind of like months went by now, and it was like they still didn't air it. And it's like it's sitting there, and it was particularly devastating for the woman who played Mary.
Nina Helm.
Who's a terrific actor and shows up in other stuff later. But it was like her first sort of like big part, and they didn't air it. And I could never get a straight answer. And I remember trying to get through to like the head of Fox who commissioned it. I said, do you guys hate it, or what's the problem? And they said it ended up being this weird tax thing where they were like, it was like if they didn't air it, they actually could write it off as a tax. Like they needed like a deduction or something. So it was like literally strictly a dollars and cents thing where it was like they were going to make more money by not airing this thing, even though they liked it. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like, it was like, shit, no one's even going to see this thing. And this is before, the internet, right? Yeah. So it's like, so it would kind of just disappeared. Like it was just like something that people had a tape of, or they shared a tape, but that was it. And then I was always kind of pissed about that. So I finally just posted. I said, fuck it, I'll just post it. Maybe somebody will be interested.
It's definitely gone viral, and it's found its audience all these years later.
Yeah.
That's
wow, how weird. I had no idea. That's really interesting.
But you watched it on some YouTube page, and it's got like,
it was weird.
I don't know if it's on YouTube, but it was on a YouTube page, and it had like over 3 million views. Yeah. So it's cool.
Wow, I should have posted.
I guess before, because we got about 2 minutes left. Lisa Wilcox, star playing Florence Henderson.
Totally,
insanely spot on.
Nightmare on Elm Street, all that.
So stuff. Beautiful, so that was a great casting, and
that was a great. I got really lucky with that cast. They were all really good, and also like Fox put like there's like I was using like Jackson 5 songs and stuff in that. Like they paid. I was like, I would love to have these 2 Jackson 5s. And they were like, okay. I'm like, that's never happened before. I never had the budget for that. So I got really super lucky on that one.
Like, a kid growing up watching Brady Bunch and then getting to like you go to set and all these people are in the costumes. It had to have been surreal. We'll end on that.
Oh, it was the coolest, man. It was like I was a diehard Brady Bunch fan, so it was a huge thrill, to be able to do that. I've been very grateful. Like Hollywood's, we'll talk more about this, but like every filmmaker will talk about all the projects that they didn't get to make and all the disappointments and things that fall through. And there's tons. I'm just like anybody else. I've had tons of projects that almost got made that never got made. And those are heartbreaking, but I do think it's good. This is really helpful to me because I don't really look back on all the things I've done, and you're kind of taking me through this tour of stuff, and I'm kind of like going, well, God, I did do a couple things, so that's kind of cool. And it's heartening, to kind of like, and I'm grateful. Like I'm looking back and going, yeah, I should just shut up and be like grateful about the stuff that I did do because it was special, and I was lucky, super lucky.
Yeah, I guess we could shoot for next Saturday to finish up.
Yes.
This is an ongoing thing. It makes it more fun. So, We appreciate
As
it.
long as you guys aren't bored,
No,
then I'm happy to keep talking. Yeah.
Our heroes. So
yeah.
Oh, dude, no, this has been wonderful. So let's just email each other. Let's shoot for next Saturday.
Be in
All
touch.
right.
All right. Looks like it's about
All
to-
right. You guys have a great weekend. All right.